Chapter 801. Distinguished Guests. 5 of them sat inside the sleek PTV, watching as the streets of the city flew by. Sunny was not the only one who had donned an extravagant suit. Kai was wearing an even more stylish attire, radiating so much grace and elegance that the interior of the moving vehicle seemed almost electrified. Cassie had chosen a simple but flattering gown of soft colors. Her bracelets and jewelry were picked to match the silver half-mask that she wore like a crown. The familiar blue-green cloak was draped around her shoulders. She was holding the quiet dancer by the scabbard, as if it was a cane. Effie wore a white tunic with tasteful gold accents. There was a golden laurel resting on her head, with similar bracelets and anklets accentuating its sheen. With her olive skin and toned physique, she looked like an ancient goddess. The huntress seemed to be enjoying herself as she sipped champagne from a tall glass. Nephis chose to wear a more practical attire, which was nevertheless equally splendid. Her nightly suit consisted of black trousers, a black doublet with silver embroidery, and a pristine white cape. The simple band of the crown of dawn accentuated the steely gray of her striking eyes. Her hands, clad in white gloves, rested calmly on her knees. All of Sunny's worries about how pompous he looked in his expensive suit disappeared. Compared to the others, he looked almost underdressed. Was there really any time to worry about appearances anyway? Looking at the members of the cohort, he hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Are you ready?" Nephis glanced at him, then turned back to the window. "It's just a ball." He stared at her for a moment, then grinned. Then he laughed. "Oh, indeed. Indeed." Soon, the PTV left public streets and entered the road that led to the stronghold of the Valor clan. Although their main seat of power was situated in the Dream Realm, safely protected by the great walls of the legendary bastion, the family obviously maintained several prominent properties in the waking world. This one resembled a hybrid between an embassy and a sprawling fortress. The complex took enough area in the center of the city to be considered a separate district and encompassed a multitude of buildings, most of them just a few stories high. More floors, of course, were situated underground, where the bulk of activity took place. The purpose of the buildings ranged from serving as residences for the members of the clan and retainers to training centers for the household troops, research facilities dedicated to various applications of spell tech, and everything in between. Just like Nephis had said, a legacy clan was not just a handful of people united by a bloodline. It was a large organization that, in the case of Clan Valor, included thousands upon thousands of people from all walks of life. The fortress also housed vaults where the sleeping pods of those awakened who either belonged to or served the great clan were located, so security measures were nothing short of exaggerated. Sunny himself could see and feel plenty of sentries, both mundane and possessing greater powers. Judging by a slight frown that appeared on Kai's face, there were plenty more that he had failed to notice. The complex was fully prepared to face any kind of attack, be it a manifestation of a nightmare gate or a sudden assault perpetrated by the forces of rival clans. On one hand, that made Sunny feel safe. On the other hand, escaping this stronghold would not be easy. Let's hope I won't need to. Other than that, the aesthetics of the complex were very pleasing to the eye. There were plenty of trees and grass around, with architecture that did a great job of hiding the utilitarian and militaristic design of the sprawling fortress. In fact, if Sunny did not know any better, he would have thought that he was in the middle of a blissful garden district that was meant for people to relax in peace and tranquility. Living here must have been very nice. Chances were he would have an opportunity to experience that life rather soon. Yeah, as if that would happen. Sunny glanced at Nephis and then turned away, his face darkening. A few minutes later, their PTV approached the center of the complex, where a grand structure stood, illuminated by bright spotlights. He felt a bit of awe when he noticed that it was built of stone blocks similar to those that Bastion itself consisted of. This hinted at the fact that the stones were brought to the waking world from the Dream Realm. Considering that only powerful masters and saints could transport matter between two worlds, the cost of the Great Hall was nothing short of astronomical. He could hardly imagine a more impressive and effective proclamation of wealth and power. The great clans really knew how to set the stage. The walls of the hall were decorated by vermilion banners that stretched from its roof to the very ground, each bearing the image of an anvil pierced by a sword. A red carpet led from the grand stairs to the road where a row of similarly luxurious PTVs were parked, slowly moving as their distinguished passengers disembarked. Neat rows of uniformed honor guards stood at the sides of the red carpet, forming a living corridor through which the guests had to walk before they reached the entrance. Everything about them screamed of discipline and power. These soldiers alone were enough to protect people invited to the ball from most dangers. Not that the guests needed any protection. Although there were a few high-ranking mundane humans among them, most were either promising awakened or masters. There were even saints here, which made Sunny feel rather uncomfortable. If there was one group of people in the city he really wouldn't want to provoke, it was those attending the ball. Sunny felt like a little fish being thrown in a tank full of hungry sharks. He could probably fight off or at least escape from any one of these sharks. But all of them together? Still, I'm not without sharp teeth myself. Finally, their PTV reached the vermilion carpet. Sunny waited for the door to open, then sighed and stepped outside. Chapter 802, Feast of Deceit. Nephis walked forward with her usual impassive confidence. It was as though the magnificence of the towering hall, the rows of armor-clad honor guards, and the distinguished guests surrounding them did not deserve her attention, let alone apprehension. Her face was still and inscrutable, and her eyes were cold and focused. As the rest of the cohort followed behind her, Sunny couldn't help but feel uneasy. Right now, he was especially frustrated at his lacking ability to read her moods. He just hoped that Changing Star was not going to try and assassinate the members of the Valor clan as soon as she saw them. No way she wouldn't, right? Their arrival caused a bit of a stir. Many eyes were suddenly directed at the 4 members of the cohort, but it was nothing compared to how many people were staring at Nephis, either openly or in secret. She did not pay them any attention, so Sunny looked straight ahead and pretended to not care either. Of course, he was tensely studying everything and everyone around them through his shadow. Somehow, he felt as if he had returned to the Red Colosseum. Sunny almost expected the people surrounding them to start chanting glory at any second. Of course, that did not happen. The cohort walked up the stairs and entered the grand hall, where they were led to massive doors that were carved of familiar wood. As the doors opened into a vast chamber full of exquisitely dressed people, a loud voice announced, "Lady Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan, Ascended Song of the Fallen, Ascended Raised by Wolves, Ascended Nightingale, Ascended Sunless." For a moment, every conversation in the hall paused. Everyone turned to look at the new arrivals. Sunny frowned. The amount of pressure that crashed into him was enough to make a mundane person kneel. It was not that the guests were consciously exerting it, just the side effect of so many powerful people being gathered in one place. Just at first glance, he identified nearly 100 masters and a handful of saints in the crowd, with each of the latter basically glowing like a beacon of power in the sea of people, surrounded by a small island of empty space. A very large chunk of humanity's defensive capabilities were gathered in this hall. If Sunny was pressured, then Nephis must have felt as if a mountain landed on her. And yet, she did not bat an eye. A wave of whispers rose, barely audible in the harmonious hum of relaxing music. "It's her." "What? Changing Star is here? Look! It's the heiress of immortal flame." Even among the absolute elites, Neph's status was immense enough to create a commotion. The other 4 members got a lot of attention too, as the brightest stars of the younger generation of Awakened. Both their SS designations and the rapid speed of their ascension made them noteworthy people. Subjected to hundreds of gazes, Nephis nodded curtly and walked toward the tables that offered drinks and refreshments. As she did, the arrival of another guest was announced, causing the excitement of the crowd to subside a little. Sunny felt incredibly awkward. "So, what do we do now?" Kai simply smiled. "We don't have to do anything, really, before the host arrives and commences the ball. Usually we would use this time to walk around and socialize, but in this case, there is no need. Everyone will come to us. So just enjoy yourself, smile, and answer politely if someone addresses you." Sunny shifted his shoulders. That is terrible advice. How was he supposed to enjoy himself and smile, knowing what was at stake? As for being polite, politeness often required a person to lie. What was he supposed to do if someone asked him a question that demanded a rude answer? Luckily, he had nothing to fear. Very soon, a stream of people started to approach them, somehow making it seem as if they all just happened to walk by. However, all their attention was concentrated on Nephis. Barely anyone spared a moment to chat with the other members of the cohort, and even then, Sunny was the last in line. Which suited him fine. Lady Changing Star, it is an honor to meet you. You made us all proud, young lady. I was actually friends with your grandfather. I once fought a battle side by side with your parents. The memory of their valiance was forever etched into my heart. Everyone wanted to, if not become friends, then to at least establish a connection with the daughter of the hallowed clan that seemed to be rising from the ashes. Nephis remained calm, conversing with the great and powerful people that approached her in a neutral, but slightly stifled tone. Sunny could feel the flames burning in her soul growing hotter and hotter, however. She was filled with masterfully suppressed rage. Well, he would be too. All these well-wishers could not wait to share the tales of how highly they valued and admired her parents and grandfather, and yet, they had been perfectly fine to do nothing when the immortal Flame Clan needed help. None of them had raised a hand to help Nephis when she was young, weak, and being hunted by the assassins of the hidden rulers of the awakened society. It was only now that she had become ascended, and an absolutely outstanding one at that they remembered past friendships and tried to ingratiate themselves to her. Their smiles and pretty words were worthless. Their friendship was worthless. This was all just a big charade. Sunny observed the elites with a bit of bewilderment. Were they all such shameless liars, or did they actually believe their own lies? In any case, this feast of deceit was nothing short of delectable, if only it was not so amateurish. After a while, he suddenly felt a cold shiver running down his spine. Turning his head slightly, Sunny noticed a familiar face. An exquisitely beautiful woman in a dazzling dress the color of red wine was approaching them. She was graceful and elegant, with a supple figure and full scarlet lips. Her most striking feature, however, was her skin. It was gray like stormy clouds, smooth like silk, and devoid of any imperfections. The woman smiled, revealing perfectly even, pearly teeth. Lady Nephis, I am so glad to see you again. Changing Star looked at her and lingered for a moment. Then, she said, Seishan, I'm glad to see you as well. Chapter 803, Friendly Reminder. Seishan, the former lieutenant of the bright Lord Gunlaug and leader of the Handmaidens, was standing in front of them with a calm smile. Sunny had not seen her after the tumultuous escape from the Forgotten Shore, where she had held the line as the commander of the second defense bulwark of the Dreamer army. He had thought that becoming a master would make him less susceptible to her presence, but it did not. Her striking beauty, her exotic looks, and the aura of mystery that surrounded Seishan were just as compelling as ever. The knowledge of how frightening her true nature was also made it impossible for him to remain unaffected. Not to mention the most important fact of all, Seishan was one of the adopted daughters of Ki Song, the ruler of the Great Song clan, and one of the three sovereigns. If anything, knowing more about her background only made Sunny pay the beautiful woman extra attention. What the hell is she doing here? Seishan, meanwhile, looked at the other members of the cohort and said with a small but seemingly sincere smile, Athena, Kai, Cassia, Sunless. It is good to see you doing well, too. Effie gave her a long look, then shrugged. Likewise, how have you and your girls been? After the return from the Forgotten Shore, half of the members of the former Dreamer army had decided to follow Cassie and became known as the Fire Keepers. Of the remaining half, most had chosen a different path, either remaining independent like Sunny and Aiko or joining various legacy clans. All the surviving handmaidens, however, had followed Seishan back to Song. Just like that, the great clan had not only received its lost daughter back, but also earned the utmost loyalty of a dozen extremely promising recruits. Come to think of it, that might have been one of the reasons why Valor wanted to gain the allegiance of the Fire Keepers so badly. A group of exceptional and supremely battle-hardened awakened might not have been able to change the balance of power between the two great clans immediately. But in a few years, when the survivors of the Dreamer army started becoming masters, or maybe even saints, eventually that could easily change. Seishan responded in a serious tone. We are doing well. My clan embraced us with open arms. After reuniting with my sisters, I was also able to bring a lot of value to the Song family with my unique knowledge and experience. The long years I had spent on the Forgotten Shore were not for naught. She had been stuck in that hell for far longer than any of them. In fact, Sunny did not know how many years Seishen had spent in the Dark City. Exactly, but it might have been as high as 9 or 10. Being able to survive and hold on to power for so long spoke a lot about how resourceful and dangerous the daughter of Kisong was, especially considering that, in the end, she was the only one of the old guard who had managed to escape. No wonder the great clan was so eager to get her back. Seishan looked at them and smiled. Of course, we have yet to achieve the same measure of success as the 5 of you. Reaching ascension so soon after becoming awakened is no small feat. You have my respect. Her smile paled a little. I will be going away to challenge my own second nightmare in a few days, as a matter of fact. This ball is the last opportunity I have to experience the wonders of the waking world before that. She looked around wistfully and sighed. So she is also in a hurry to become a master, huh? Sunny stared at the gray-skinned beauty with a bit of apprehension. Seishan was already scary enough as an awakened. How much more powerful would she become after ascending? Kai offered the former leader of handmaidens a reassuring smile. I am sure that you and your cohort will do fine. The second nightmare is a terrible challenge, but people who survive the Forgotten Shore are suited to face its dangers more than anyone else. You will triumph. Before Seishan could answer, Nephis finally spoke. Looking at the daughter of Song impassively, she said in her usual even tone, I have to admit, I am surprised to see you here. Seishan lingered for a moment. Oh, you must have heard about the recent disharmony between Song and Valor. Do not pay it too much attention, Lady Nephis. Despite our disagreements, it is still important to present a united front. I am here to keep up appearances. Changing Star thought for a moment, then nodded. I understand you are here to send a message. However, I find it curious that a junior member like you was chosen above more senior representatives of the great clan Song. One can't help but wonder what message exactly such a choice is intended to deliver. Seishan's smile widened a little. Well, it is not my place to question the decisions of the elders. In any case, I am very happy that I got the chance to see you all again. While we were never truly friends, I value what you have done for me and my wards, as well as what we went through together, a great deal. Her pearly teeth glistened in the bright light of exquisite chandeliers, suddenly seeming much sharper. I hope that we will be able to deepen that bond one day. Of course, whether or not it blossoms into a real friendship depends on our decisions. Sunny sighed. Ah. Seishan looked at them one last time. Strangely, her gaze lingered on him for a few extra moments. Then, she politely excused herself and left to mingle with other guests of the ball. So that's what it was all about. Her meaning was more than clear. Clan Song decided to not go as far as making an earnest effort to spoil the negotiations with Valor and try to recruit the members of the cohort and the firekeepers into its ranks instead. However, they did issue a warning. Make the right decision if you know what's good for you. Stay away from our rivals or else. That threat might have been packaged into an exquisitely beautiful cover, but the underlying message remained quite clear. Looking at the back of Seishan as she was walking away, Sunny shook his head. Did I somehow end up involved in politics? By the spell I did, didn't I? Curses, why can't a guy just grow stronger than everyone in the world and unreasonably rich in peace? Chapter 8104, Whispering Blade. A few minutes later, the atmosphere in the great hall suddenly changed. The hum of voices grew quiet, and many of the guests shifted, turning to a particular spot. As Sunny watched, a tall figure appeared on a wide balcony above them. The man was strong and severe, with a sharp face and even sharper, cold eyes. His black hair was touched by silver at the temples. He was wearing an elegant attire that somehow looked like a suit of impregnable armor, despite being made of nothing but black fabric. His vermilion cloak moved slightly, as if touched by invisible wind. As soon as the man appeared, Sunny felt a considerable pressure descending on the hall. The dignified stranger radiated so much power and authority that it was hard not to admire him or fear him. He was a saint, without a doubt. What was more, his features looked slightly like that of Mordred and Morgan. For a moment, Sunny thought that he was looking at Anvil of Valor himself. But no, that could not be. Although the familial likeness was there, it was not too pronounced. The mythical sovereign was also not supposed to be able to enter the waking world easily, let alone openly show himself in public. That would just go against everything that the sovereigns did to remain in the shadows. This must be Saint Madoc of Valor, also known as Whispering Blade. Saint Madoc was one of Anvil's siblings and the nominal leader of the great clan Valor. Of course, Sunny knew who truly called the shots, but the status of this powerful man was by no means for show. Whispering Blade was a legendary warrior and one of humanity's most formidable champions in his own right. As the guests quieted down, Saint Madoc looked at them from above with his steely blue eyes and then smiled slightly. Instantly, the pressure receded, making the mundane humans in the crowd sigh with relief. Morgan's uncle spoke, his strong voice easily reaching into every corner of the great hall. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, welcome to the annual ball of the great clan Valor. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you all under our roof once again. In the past year, many things have happened. Some of our brothers and sisters are not with us anymore. A somber silence settled over the hall. Every year brought a lot of death to Awakened. Even masters were not spared from that fate. This year in particular had dealt a heavy blow to humanity. Even though few knew of what had really happened, the absence of St. Cormac was clearly felt by many. Transcendents were so exceedingly rare that the loss of even one of them echoed across the world. As the guests turned somber, Whispering Blade's smile suddenly widened, dispelling the solemn mood. Despite that, it pleases me to see many new faces among you. Humanity has grown stronger yet again. New heroes rose to carry the torch for those who had fallen in battle. With champions like these, our world has nothing to fear. Despite it all, we persevere. But more than that, we rise. Nothing can stop our ascension. He looked at the guests and then sighed. Well, those of you who know me also know that I am not one for long speeches. To be honest, this one was actually written by my beloved wife, who is far more eloquent and wise than me. Not to mention pleasant to look at. A wave of polite chuckles spread through the crowd. Saint Madoc smiled once again. Today is not a day for sorrow. Today is a day for joy. And so let the ball commence. As soon as he said that, the space in the middle of the hall was cleared, and the musicians started to play a magnificent and emotional composition. Whispering Blade danced the first dance himself, accompanied by a beautiful, mature woman. Moving with elegance and grace, they both looked breathtakingly splendid. Soon, other pairs joined them. Sunny observed the dance with a bit of interest. He had not known what to really expect from this ball, but to his relief, it was nothing like the awkward and almost comical sight that he had witnessed in the nightclub a few weeks ago. The dancers were much more purposeful and elaborate in their movements. Both partners had to move in synchronicity to not disturb the flow of the dance, following the music with surprising skill. The gracefulness of their steps, the exquisite attires, the radiant physical beauty common among the Awakened, the luxurious decorations of the great hall, all of it made the ball look rather dazzling. He was also able to appreciate the ceremony due to his familiarity with shadow dance. Of course, his battle style was not a literal dance. However, it was derived from one. In fact, every battle style had something in common with dancing, since both had to do with motion, coordination, agility, and rhythm. So, even if Sunny was never taught how to dance, he was able to quickly learn the basics from just observing those who were better versed in it. He could have even joined the dancers if he wanted to. Of course, he didn't. Sunny noticed that it was customary for men to invite the women to dance. As he watched, many handsome and distinguished guests offered their hands to their beautiful counterparts and led them to the center of the hall. More than a few burning gazes landed on Nephis, but were quickly doused by her cold, unapproachable expression. Fortunately or unfortunately, the other members of the cohort were caught in the cone of silence that surrounded her, so no one approached them either. After some time, Kai invited Cassie to dance, while Effie wandered away in the direction of the tables that were barely standing, burdened by the weight of various delicacies. Sunny, meanwhile, grew bored. Dem? How long do we have to wait? Are these negotiations going to start, or what? Eventually he glanced at Nephis, then left her and walked away in search of a bathroom. A few minutes later, he was washing his hands in front of a mirror. Looking at his pale reflection, Sunny lingered for a few moments, and then said, "I know that you are there. Stop hiding." Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then his reflection suddenly offered him a pleasant smile. "Oh, how did you know?" Chapter 805, Conversation with a Mirror. When his reflection suddenly spoke, Sunny flinched and jumped back. A startled expression appeared on his face. He stared at the mirror with wide eyes, then cursed and remained silent for a few seconds. Finally, Sunny uttered through gritted teeth, "I did not know. I just developed a habit of saying random rubbish to mirrors in case something like this happens. Who knew that this time you would actually turn up?" Mordred, who disturbingly wore his face, blinked a couple of times, then laughed. "So it was a bluff? Goodness. I can't believe I fell for this trick." Sunny's reflection shook its head. Sunny himself, who felt incredibly troubled by the sight of his own likeness being inhabited by the Prince of Nothing, sucked in a breath of air, and then hissed, "What are you even doing here? Have you entirely lost your mind? This is the stronghold of clan valor." Mordred shrugged. "Why? Can't I visit my own clan's ball?" Sunny suppressed the desire to palm his face. "Not if you want to live." But then again, why would he care if Mordred lived or died? Actually, it would have been wonderful if the troublesome mirror wraith was caught and either destroyed or imprisoned again by his mighty family. Sunny would have one less headache if they did. Unless Mordred decided to trade away his secrets, of course. Damnation. The Prince of Nothing, meanwhile, waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry so much, Sunless. I am not here to do anything. I just wanted to take a peek at the festivities. No one will notice." Judging by his confident smile, Mordred was sufficiently certain of that statement. This probably meant that he had acquired at least one potent anti-divination tool. Well, the mere fact that the great and mighty clan Valor had failed to track him down, yet already hinted at that possibility. If not for Sunny's random shot in the dark, no one would indeed have noticed the transient reflection. Mordred looked at him and lingered for a few moments. Then, he said in a pensive tone, "You know, Sunless, for someone who keeps denying his ties with the great clans, you sure brush sides with them a lot." Sunny was so outraged that he lost the gift of speech for a second. "And whose fault is that, you bastard? If you didn't involve me in your mess, I would have been living happily ever after somewhere else." "Well, probably." Mordred awkwardly coughed. Then, he regained his composure and said with a bit of reproach, "I already apologized, didn't I? In any case, complications or not, you should choose your friends carefully, Sunless." Sunny glared at the reflection for a bit. "Am I having a déjà vu? I swear I just had this exact conversation with someone else a few minutes ago. You did not steal Seishan's body by any chance, did you?" Mordred tilted his head a little. "I don't think so. Who is Seishan?" Sunny opened his mouth, then frowned. No, he wouldn't have. The damned lunatic was already being hunted by one great clan. Killing an heiress of another would do him no good. An acquaintance of mine. Never mind about her. Mordred smiled. "If you say so, I must say, you do have a lot of interesting acquaintances." A curious expression appeared on the reflection's face. "That changing star is rather fascinating. To think that the Immortal Flame clan was able to return to a semblance of its former glory, and with the help of a young dreamspawn, no less. Maybe I should take her body instead. What do you think, Sunless? Should I?" He was obviously probing to get a reaction out of Sunny, but luck was not on his side. Sunny simply shrugged and said indifferently, "Be my guest." It seemed as if he was absolutely disinterested in whether Mordred would kill and replace Nephis or not. Of course he wasn't. Not really. He just thought that the Prince of Nothing would dearly regret trying to consume Changing Star's soul. Not only was she a tyrant, which would make battling her a nightmare, he also suspected that her soul possessed its own formidable defenses. Nephis had already hinted that the lineage of sun gods strengthened it somehow. But that only accounted for the quantity of her force. There was also the quality Sunny had a hunch that Mordred would be burning himself alive if he tried to invade her radiant soul sea. Wouldn't that be a sight to see? He glanced at his reflection, then said coldly, Is this all you wanted to say? Because if that's it, I have a ball to return to." Then Sunny scoffed and added, "And by the way, didn't you give a very pompous speech about how I should pray to never meet you again, the last time we saw each other? Kind of presumptuous of you to then go ahead and place yourself straight in my sights, in a bathroom of all places." Mordred's smile paled a little. "Ah, that I did not forget about that, Sunless. Truth be told, I am still very peeved about what you have done. Come to think of it, maybe I should do something to lessen my frustration. Say, which of your friends do you value the least?" Sunny's fist slammed in the mirror, shattering it. Mordred laughed, staring at him from the shards. Sunny's face became distorted by the cracks. "Oh, Sunless, Sunless, so passionate." Sunny stared at the broken mirror for a few moments, then said through gritted teeth, "I value all my friends, you bastard. Affection is not something you can assign a numerical value to and then compare which number is bigger. Well, you wouldn't know, I guess. Not only do you care about no one has most likely ever cared about you either." He took a step forward and stared directly at his reflection. "You like to talk big, Mordred, and make it seem as if I should be afraid of you. But that is true the other way around, too. I can be scary when I want to, too. Think long and think hard before making me your enemy. Or you will learn to fear the shadows." Mordred stopped laughing and looked at him silently for a few long moments. His smile slowly disappeared. After a few moments of silence, the Prince of Nothing sighed. "We understand each other, then. Let's not become enemies, Sunless. Crushing you won't bring me any joy." With that, he disappeared, as if he had never been there. The reflection still looked the same, but the alien presence seemed to be gone from it. All that remained was a broken, distorted, angry image of Sunny. He grimaced and then turned away. "We'll see who crushes whom, bastard, if time comes." Chapter 806, A Dance of Light and Shadow. After returning to the dancing hall, Sunny saw it in a new light. His perception had shifted, making everything seem darker and more dangerous. He had already been apprehensive about the crowd of guests, but now every one of them looked like a potential threat. Mordred might have said that he was not planning to do anything and had just come to take a look. But could the banished prince be trusted? As far as Sunny was concerned, the lunatic could have been on his way to publicly assassinate one of his relatives, or slaughter as many as he could, right now. Much worse, he could be hiding inside of anyone. Every guest was a potential host. Every mundane human, every awakened, every master, none of them were beyond suspicion. Even saints were not off the list, perhaps. Sunny suppressed a groan. Curse it all. There were two carriers of divine aspects in the world that had made it their life's goal to destroy the great clan valor at all costs. And now, both of them were in this building. Even if nothing happened, the threat alone made him itchy. The great hall where dozens of beautiful pairs danced suddenly did not look as splendid. Turning around, Sunny looked at Nephis, lingered for a few moments, and then walked in her direction with steady steps. As he came close, he offered her a hand and asked, "Shall we dance?" Neph looked at him in confusion for a couple of seconds, then shrugged and placed her hand in his. Together they walked to the middle of the hall. Sunny put his second hand on her waist, while she put hers on his shoulder. Suddenly, they were extremely close to each other. Sunny's heart skipped a beat. It was in moments like this one that he missed having two. Without wasting any time, Sunny led Neph into a dance. It wasn't too hard, he just had to listen to the music and repeat what the other dancers were doing. With his proficiency in shadow dance, understanding the logic and cadence of their movements was incredibly easy for him. Although Sunny was dancing for the first time in his life, he looked more comfortable and adept at it than most of the guests. Changing Star seemed like a natural, too. Perhaps it was due to her own combat mastery, or perhaps she had received lessons as an heiress of a legacy clan. In any case, almost instantly after they started the dance, the pair caught a lot of admiring stares. Sunny did not care. He had much bigger problems on his mind. Trying to not let her closeness affect him too much and failing at it, he waited for a bit and gathered his thoughts. Finally, Sunny said, his voice drowned by the music and the hum of the great hall, "I've been meaning to ask." The time to hide his head in the sand was over. Nephis silently raised an eyebrow, prompting him to continue. What exactly are you planning to do today? You know that Valor won't take no for an answer. They want to have all of us, but if that is not possible, they'll only settle for getting at least one. That way they'll be assured that the rest of us won't join a rival faction. So which one of us is going to become a retainer of the great clan Valor? Changing Star lingered for a while, allowing him to lead her in the dance. Her hand rested easily on his shoulder. After a few steps, she suddenly asked, "You don't really understand, do you?" Sunny did not frown, but his eyes suddenly became darker. "I don't. What is it that you think I don't understand?" A somber expression slowly appeared on her face. "Valor and Song are not rival factions, Sunny. They're war camps." As they spun under the light of beautiful chandeliers, she leaned even closer and said, "I've studied the facts for a long time after returning to the waking world. The ripples caused by the death of Saint Cormac, the subtle machinations that happen in the darkness, the growing imbalance of power between Bastion and Ravenheart, even the timing of Sation challenging the second nightmare, it all paints a clear picture." A slight scowl appeared on Sunny's face. "What are you trying to say?" Nephis sighed. "I am trying to make you see that the conflict between the great clans has grown into something more than mere disagreement. They are at war, or rather they will be soon." Sunny felt her hand growing tense in his own. War? Wait. What does a war between great clans even look like? Changing Star shook her head. "Something like that has never happened before, so who knows? 3 things are certain, however. It will be hidden. It will be bloody. It will claim the lives of many people." He suddenly felt cold. Damned legacies, Antarctica is about to fall, and they choose that exact moment to lunge at each other's throats. Bastards. Sunny remained silent for several steps, and then looked at Nephis intently. "All right, but what does it have to do with us?" She suddenly gripped his shoulder tighter and met his gaze. Cold, dangerous white sparks were dancing in her eyes. "Don't you see? It has everything to do with us." Sunny stopped himself from snarling. "I don't. Nephis, whether the great clans are embroiled into a secret war or not does not change anything. You are still too small and weak to openly oppose them. Please, tell me that you understand that. You were the one who said that these people are too strong, that their power is too absolute." Changing Star stared at him for a while, her face turning impassive. After a few moments of silence, she said, "I remember. I understand." She looked down and then added, which is why the answer to your question might not be what you want to hear, Sunny. You asked me which one of us will become a member of the great clan." Nephis raised her head and looked him straight in the eyes. Then, she said evenly, "It's me. I will join Valor." Chapter 807, From Within. When Sunny heard what Nephis had to say, he almost stepped on her foot. His rhythm was broken, making it difficult to remain in the flow of the dance. He narrowly avoided stumbling, regained his composure, and threw a burning gaze at her. "What?" Her expression did not change. "You heard me." Sunny opened his mouth, lingered for a moment, then simply turned around and pulled her by the hand. Despite the fact that many people stared at this sudden turn of events, he cut through the dancing guests, forcing Neph to follow. They left the middle of the great hall, then disappeared from the central chamber entirely. Finding himself in a corridor that ran along the length of the dancing hall, Sunny walked swiftly, searching for an empty room. Eventually, he had to settle for a kitchen of sorts. Several chefs and their assistants were busy preparing more refreshments for the guests of the ball, or rather, they had been. Even before Sunny entered the room, the shadows inside suddenly moved and grew darker, startling the kitchen staff. Throwing a heavy glance at them, he said in an even voice, "Leave." The chefs stared at the 2 masters in confusion for a couple of moments, then silently backed away and left through a different door, their faces pale. Sunny and Nephis were left alone. He waited for a bit, then let go of her hand and outstretched his own. A strange flute carved of emerald bone appeared in it from a swirl of sparks. Sunny brought it to his lips and blew into the hole. Surprisingly, no sound came out of the flute. Instead, it seemed to have absorbed all sounds, enveloping them in a cone of silence. Now, no one would have been able to listen in on their conversations. Sunny's shadows also kept watch outside the kitchen, just to make sure. Finally, he turned to Nephis and snarled, "You? Join Valor? What? What the hell?" Changing Star sighed, then took a step back and leaned on the wall. Then, she spoke in her usual calm, steady voice. "Why are you so surprised?" Sunny stared at her in stunned silence. Then, he shook his head. "What about your great goals? After all the crazy stunts you pulled, after all that talk about wishing to bring the three ghouls to their knees and destroy them, you are just going to join them?" Neff's eyes grew somber. "My plans did not change, Sunny." He frowned. "So you are going to destroy Valor, but you're also going to become one of their own. Don't you see the contradiction?" She looked at him intensely, then said with boiling, but suppressed emotion in her voice, "There is no contradiction. On the contrary, this is the only way I can advance my goals." Nephis took a step forward and pierced him with a searing gaze. "The sovereigns are indeed too strong. Their power is indeed too fearsome, and I am truly too weak to contend with them for now. However, they will fall by my hand, in the end. Did you hope that 2 years of being lost in the dream realm would have dulled my resolve? Did you think that I would give up?" Sunny shook his head with a dark expression. Changing Star smiled. "No, my resolve was only made sharper. I spent so many days, so many nights thinking about how to move forward and bring these old monsters down. It was not too hard to realize that if my own strength is not enough, I have to borrow it from someone else. Whose strength should I borrow then? Ah, but that is so obvious. If the sovereigns are so powerful, why would I not use their own power to destroy them?" Sunny blinked slowly. "So divide and conquer? This is your great plan?" Nephis shrugged. "They are already divided. I have to thank you for that, by the way. Although the conflict between Valor and Song had been brewing for a long time, the sudden appearance of the Dreamer army made it worse. But most of all, the death of Saint Cormac and the return of the banished Prince of War was what finally made it intolerable for the great clans." He scowled. "What? What does Mordred have to do with any of this?" Changing Star smiled darkly. "He is in the same position as me, which means that he will do the same thing as me. He would have sought out a way to use one of the sovereigns against the other too." Sunny's eyes widened. Mordred had a vendetta against his two fathers, both the one who had spawned him and the one who had raised him. That left only, "Don't tell me, is that lunatic going to join forces with the Song clan?" Nephis nodded with satisfaction. "I would be surprised if he did not already. And if I can come to that conclusion, then that means that Valor knows as well. Why do you think the strife between the two great clans has suddenly grown so dire? Valor has fewer saints. Thanks to Seishan, Valor has fewer promising awakened seeds. And now, one of their most formidable creations has joined hands with the adversary. How do you think they'll react?" Sunny looked at her grimly. "Not well." Changing Star lingered for a few moments, then nodded. "But that is what puts me in a unique position. Yes, I am small and weak. Yes, my individual strength is more or less insignificant. However, because of how disadvantaged the great clan Valor is, they desperately need me. My value in this situation is disproportionate to what it would have been otherwise, which is why they are ready to put aside their desire to see me dead and are willing to embrace me instead." Sunny scoffed. "That is all great. But why would you want to embrace them too? Wouldn't it be better to stay away and watch as the two great clans maul each other, then swoop in and finish off the weakened victor?" Nephis shook her head. "No matter how much one of the great clans weakens, its armor would still be too strong and impenetrable for me to break through it." He raised an eyebrow. "So what?" Changing Star looked at him, cold white flames dancing in her eyes. "So I won't try to. Instead, I'm going to bypass the armor and attack them from within." Chapter 8008, A Long-Awaited Conversation. Sunny grimaced. What Nephis had said made sense, as much as the word sense could be applied to her. Changing Star wanted to destroy the nightmare spell, and the sovereigns were in her way. Just like Gunlaug, the ruthless tyrant of the Bright Castle, they had seemingly given up on pursuing liberation from the spell, and instead settled for the great power that it had already bestowed upon them. What was worse, They were holding others back from rising high enough to threaten their position. At least that was how it looked from below. Perhaps the sovereigns had other reasons for their despotism and inaction, but Sunny had no way of knowing if they did. Not that it mattered to Nephis. To her, they were simply an obstacle that had to be destroyed. Her personal desire to avenge the immortal Flame Clan and bring retribution to those who had betrayed her father only made the task sweeter. However, her enemies were much too strong. She would only be able to challenge them if she became supreme herself. But the path to supremacy was guarded by the very people she needed to destroy. Faced with this dead end, she had decided to use the sovereign's own power to vanquish them. She also wanted to infiltrate the ranks of her enemy and put herself in the position to attack one of the great clans from within, when the time came. Sunny let out a heavy sigh. So, let me get this straight. You are going to join Clan Valor. Fight for them until Clan Song is destroyed to earn Anvil's trust, then turn your blade against him? Nephis lingered for a few moments, then shrugged. More or less. Why? He rubbed his face. This is a terrible plan. There are more holes in this plan than in Swiss cheese, whoever Sui is. Who says that Valor will win this war? Who says that Anvil will ever treat you as anything but a latent threat? Do you think that he is a fool? Surely he knows how much you have to hate his guts. Changing Star looked at him calmly. I do. I say who wins. I say whether he trusts me or not. It all depends on me, does it not? If I want the great Song clan to fall, I have to make sure that it falls. If I want to win Anvil's favor, I have to make sure that he favors me. I am not a passive observer in this, Sunny. I have agency to shape the future into what I want it to be, or at least try to. Sure, the chances of success are poor, but when were the odds ever on our side? Sunny scoffed, then shook his head. I'll give you that. Our luck was always terrible. However, there is a difference between being thrown into overwhelming danger against your will and deciding to put yourself at risk of your own volition. Unlike before, we don't have to be underdogs. You are choosing this. Nephis shook her head as well. That is where you are wrong, Sunny. Do you really think that I have any choice? Do you think that I can turn back now? That the sovereigns will ever let me be? No, it is too late for that. It is, as you said, Valor are determined to have their pound of flesh. All I can choose is where they sink their teeth. He glared at her for a few moments, then spat. Aren't you forgetting something? Looking at him, Changing Star frowned. What? Sunny took a step forward. Me. You are forgetting me. I have a say in this too, goddammit. She remained silent for a while. Eventually Nephis said, I am not forcing you to do anything. You don't have to follow me to Valor if you don't wish to. A crooked smile appeared on his face. Oh, great. But is this really true? There is a certain bond between us, after all. I am only free to do as I wish until you decide otherwise. Who knows if your mood will change one day? Neff stared at him for a few long seconds. Then, she sighed and crossed her arms. Ah, so this is what it's all about. Sunny gritted his teeth, then said slowly, Since we are talking about it, let's talk. This conversation was a long time coming. So, Nephis, tell me, what are you going to do with your power over me? Her face remained impassive. Neff looked at him coldly for a moment, and then said, Sunny was already opening his mouth to retort before she finished speaking, but then froze. He stood still for a few moments, then let out a long breath. Well, good, because if you ever tried, one of us would have died. That is not a threat, just a fact. Suddenly, white sparks ignited in Changing Star's eyes. She leaned forward slightly and said, her voice full of barely suppressed emotion, And do you know why? Suddenly, feeling a sense of unease, Sunny frowned. No, I can't say that I do. Why? She took a step forward and stopped in front of him, almost as close as they had been during their dance. Her face was still, but her eyes were full of searing flame. Because I don't need anyone to follow me against their will. I don't need a magical collar to make people serve me. I don't need slaves. That is not enough for me, Sunny. Why should I settle for submission when I can have loyalty? People who will follow me, serve me, and obey me will do so because that is their most ardent desire. They will do so with a smile. If I ever want to make you mine, Sunny, you will become mine. Not because you were forced to, but because you would want to. That is also a fact. He stared at her for a few moments, startled by the sudden intensity of her words. Then, a stubborn expression appeared on his face. Aren't you too full of yourself? Who do you think you are to decide what I want? Nephis looked at him, then turned away and sighed. I am the person who knows you best in the world, Sonny. 2 worlds even. She lingered for a few moments, and then added quietly, as I said, I will never force you to do anything. But whether you like it or not, our fates are intertwined, and that bond has nothing to do with your innate ability. In truth, they were entangled the moment we met, in front of the academy gates. We just did not know it yet. You can't escape it. Can't escape fate? Sonny looked at Nephis for a long time, and then smiled darkly. Watch me. With that, he dismissed the bone flute, turned around, and left the kitchen. Entering the corridor, Sonny walked away. His nostrils were flaring, and his face was contorted by an expression of anger. As he walked, he took out his communicator and dialed a familiar number. After some time, a female voice resounded from the speaker. Sonny? What a nice surprise. It's good to hear from you. He hesitated for a few moments, and then took a deep breath. Then, Sonny smiled and answered in a friendly tone. Master Jet. Hey, I have a question for you. He paused for a second and then asked, How cold is it in Antarctica? Chapter 809, True Strength. Sonny was riled and angry. Once again, talking to Nephis made him lose his sense of balance. However, the decision he made was not an emotional one. He had enough composure to keep a clear head even while being affected by seething feelings. Years of battles and dire conflicts had taught him how to keep a cool head. So, his choice was cold and calculated. 2 things had become clear during the conversation. The first one was very simple. Nephis intended to join the great clan Valor, while Sonny didn't want to have anything to do with it. It was one thing to become a retainer of a powerful and prosperous clan in order to make use of its vast knowledge, arsenal, and resources. Despite his strong desire to remain independent, Sonny had entertained the idea himself. However, it was a completely different thing to join an embattled clan that was on the verge of entering a destructive and bloody war against a similarly fearsome adversary. To add insult to injury, Valor was on the losing end of the equation. Their enemy, the great clan Song, held all the advantages. And even worse than that was the idea of joining a warring faction with conscious plans of betraying it further down the line. Nephis was more than willing to eventually face not one, but both great clans in battle. She had her goals and conviction, but Sonny just wanted to be left alone. He saw no reason to follow her into the dragon's maw. More than that, with her joining Valor, the initial condition that had forced him into the damned negotiations in the first place was resolved. Since Valor was willing to settle for recruiting just one member of the cohort, and Changing Star was willing to play the role of the recruit, then why the hell would he follow suit? In short, despite all the contradictory feelings raging in Sonny's heart, the situation was rather straightforward. There was no compelling reason for him to enter into service of the great clan, but there was a convenient opportunity for him to take a step back and walk away. He would be a fool not to use it. Of course, in reality, things were a bit more complicated. What Changing Star had said might have angered him, but she was not wrong. Their fates did, indeed, seem to be intertwined. From being born in the same year, to receiving divine and complementing aspects, from meeting at the gates of the academy, to being sent to the same small patch of the forgotten shore, whether by coincidence or not, their connection went far beyond the tether of the shadow bond. Sonny had a strong suspicion that his intrinsic attribute, fated, had a lot to do with placing Nephis in his path. And as much as Sonny wished to defy fate, he was not arrogant enough to think that he was ready to break its chains just yet. He could already see how, no matter what he did, he would not be able to escape colliding against Changing Star again. She had been right when she said that escaping the notice of the great clans entirely was impossible for them, more so for her, but also true for Sonny. With his meteoric rise, his special strategic asset designation, and his connection to both Nephis and Mordred, not to mention Shadow God and Weaver, coming into contact with the sovereigns and their domains was just a matter of time. Even if Neff joined Valor and Sunny did not, they would most likely meet again soon enough. The question, then, was more about the nature of their future relationship than whether it would exist or not. So what could Sunny do to shape it into something that had a semblance of corresponding to his desires? Perhaps the most important revelation that had resulted from their conversation was the nature of Neff's intentions towards Sunny and her power over him. Sunny had spent several weeks burying his head in the sand and avoiding this pivotal discussion. As the result, those weeks had been perhaps some of the nicest in his life. However, his actions had also caused everything to blow up in his face in the end. Nephis had said in no uncertain terms that she had no intention of ever issuing another order to him, not because of any moral consideration, but simply because it was beneath her. Changing Star had no need for an unwilling slave. She disdained the idea of forcing anyone to obey her. Instead, she planned to have people follow her of their own free will. Instead of enslaving anyone, she preferred to have people enslave and bind themselves by their desire to serve her. Neff had told him that she would never force him to do anything, but she also seemed to be certain that he would follow her willingly in the end. And that, to Sunny, was the core problem of the dynamic between them. He believed that Nephis valued him. She even respected him. But despite all that, she still saw him as a follower. And a follower could never be an equal. Damn it. Worst of all, her stance was not baseless. Sunny couldn't help but think back to his conversation with Effie. The Huntress had told him once that he would never be stronger than Changing Star, because Changing Star had something that he lacked: conviction. Sunny had been tempted to dismiss her well-meant, but biting remark. However, he could not dismiss the fact that despite all his desperate attempts, despite him almost killing himself several times to catch up to Nephis, there was still a noticeable gap in power and accomplishment between them. He did not think that he lacked determination. Gods knew that very few people have pushed themselves as hard and endured as much as he had. But his last conversation with Changing Star had finally given Sunny an inkling of what it was exactly that he lacked. As far as Sunny saw it, his determination was no less intense than Neff's. However, all his goals were internal. All he did was react to things. He did not strive to reach anything instead. He only strived to avoid and get away from things, get away from danger, from poverty, from fate itself. He had always been reactive. Neff, on the contrary, had always been active. She had always pursued a goal that was larger than herself. As the result, her conviction pushed her forward like an external force, while Sunny was stuck trying to pull himself up with nothing propelling him forward. That was why he was destined to always lag behind. Selfish desire to attain material wealth and live free would never be able to push him as hard and as far as Changing Star's insane and unattainable dream was pushing her. At least that was his current thinking. Maybe it was all senseless crap. In any case, Sunny was determined to try and find an equally powerful motivation. Either it would help him or it would not, however. No matter what happened, he was not satisfied being seen as a valued follower instead of an equal. He was still determined to grow stronger, much stronger, and if conviction was what it took to speed up his progress, he was willing to give it a try. Where was one supposed to find conviction, though? Well, Sunny was pretty sure that attempting to save hundreds of millions of people in Antarctica was a good place to start. That was where he was going to go in search of true strength. Chapter 810, Secret Gift. A couple of days later, Sunny was staring at his living room with a strange expression on his face. Everything had already been settled. He was leaving on another long expedition this time, in the waking world instead of the dream realm. Somehow, it promised to be even more of a nightmare. Well, whatever. High matters of fate and conviction aside, Antarctica was still a perfect place for him to grow stronger. Now that Sunny was a master, it was not as easy for him to gather shadow fragments. Only fallen nightmare creatures and those more powerful would do. Finding swarms of them was a task in and of itself, and the southern quadrant that was about to be devoured by an endless horde of abominations offered a perfect opportunity. Not only would he be able to work toward becoming a tyrant, test his mettle, and sharpen his skill, there would also be plenty of soul shards for him to collect, which he needed to continue practicing weaving. So, Sunny was supposed to be gathering his things and preparing to leave. The thing was that he had already done that before the ball, just in case he would have to run away in haste. Sunny had prepared so thoroughly that he could just walk out of the door and disappear right now. Huh? Weird. He sighed, and then checked the refrigerator again, just to make sure that he did not leave anything that could spoil there. Nope, all clean. His communicator vibrated, then displayed a notification. The title of a network article appeared in view. Breaking news: a young hero is adopted by the brother-in-arms of her late father. Changing star joins hands with the great clan Valor. The corner of his mouth twitched. At that moment, the door opened, letting in Effie and Kai. The two looked around, noticing the condition of the house. A few moments later, the huntress shook her head. Damn, you're really leaving? Sunny closed the refrigerator, then walked over and patted her on the shoulder. I am. Effie stared at him for a couple of moments, then sighed. And you're still not going to tell us where? He smiled. I'm not at liberty to say. Don't worry, though. You'll probably learn in about a month. She blinked. What's that supposed to mean? Sunny waved a hand. It just means that you'll know soon. Effie remained silent for a few moments, then shrugged with irritation. Well, all right. Be that way then. Sunny hesitated for a bit. Finally, he asked, What about you? And the others? This time, it was Kai who answered. You must have already seen the news. It hasn't been officially announced yet, but a thing like that is hard to keep secret. Nephis is being adopted by Clan Valor. Cassie and the Firekeepers will follow her as retainers. As for Effie and I, well, to be honest, we haven't decided yet. Sunny glanced at his friends with a somber expression. What are you guys thinking? Effie leaned on the wall and grimaced. I don't know. I was always thinking about becoming a master, but weirdly, I never really thought about what I would do after. Those pompous Valor folks rub me the wrong way, but they do have a lot to offer. Plus, pretty much everyone I know is with them now. Kai smiled weakly. I am even more lost. I didn't even have thoughts of becoming a master. Now that I am, I want to do some good, I guess. It's just hard to determine what is the best way to do it. Sunny lingered for a few moments. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. Well, don't be in a rush to make a decision. Wait for April at least. It was February right now. By April, the collapse of Antarctica would be slowly starting, and the government would have already announced voluntary mobilization. Sunny had wanted to tell his friends about the approaching disaster, but Master Jet insisted on keeping it confidential, for now. He was not sure that Effie and Kai would want to go there anyway. The two of them, meanwhile, glanced at each other. Then, Kai cautiously asked, Does it have anything to do with your sudden departure? Sunny nodded. It does. Don't ask anything else, though, or you'll put me in an awkward position. Neither of them did, respecting his request. A strange silence settled between them. Finally, Sunny scoffed. What are you guys doing? It's not like we're saying goodbye. I'm still anchored at the ivory tower. You fools. I can always hop in the dream realm and meet you there. Kai scratched the back of his head. Oh yeah, true. I didn't think about that. Sunny shook his head. Same goes for Nephis and Cassie, since they're not planning to move to Bastion yet. We might not be an active cohort anymore, but we're still a big, dysfunctional family of sorts. I can guarantee that you won't miss me. In fact, you'll probably wish that I appeared in front of your faces less often. He grinned and then gestured to the door. In any case, thanks for dropping by, but now I really have to go. I'm on a bit of a schedule. He walked them outside, then watched as they boarded a PTV and left. There were no emotional goodbyes, since what he had said was true. They would all be seeing each other in the dream realm often, no matter where they were in the waking world. So that meant that he had one last thing to do. Sunny sealed the house by inputting a security code into the lock panel, looked at it one last time, and walked to one of the neighboring buildings. He took out his communicator, sent a short message, and then waited for a bit. A minute later, a slightly surprised teenage girl walked out onto the porch, wearing cozy home clothes. Sunny? Why are you here? We're not supposed to have a lesson today. He smiled, and then pointed to the backpack that hung from his shoulder. Hey, Rain. I just came by to say that I'll be going away again. This time it might take a bit longer for me to return. Her expression subtly changed. Oh. She remained silent for a while. then asked in a guarded, tentative voice, Is it going to be dangerous again?" Sunny shrugged with a carefree expression. "Dangerous? Well, I guess. I'm pretty certain that I can handle it, though. I'm a pretty tough guy, so don't worry." He sighed and then added, "Plus, I'm staying in the real world this time. You can message me whenever. The network connection is going to be patchy where I'm going, so I might not be able to answer immediately. I will eventually, though. That's a promise." Finally, she relaxed a little. "Really? That's great." He nodded. After hesitating for a few moments, Sunny took a step closer and said, "You are going to turn 16 in a couple of months, Rain. That means that you have to be ready. You might be chosen by the spell, or you might not. In any case, I think that you are sufficiently prepared." He fell silent for a bit, and then added, "I taught you as much as I could. The rest depends on you. Keep practicing with your sword. Keep sharpening your mind as well. Most importantly, keep working on your mentality." Rain looked at him and nodded seriously. "I will." She did not notice that something strange had happened in the spot where their shadows intersected. A massive, dark silhouette that resembled a Stygian serpent flowed from Sunny's shadow, then hid itself in hers. Sunny had invoked one of Soul Serpent's abilities. Grace of Shadows ability description. The master of the Soul Serpent can grace another with the trust and companionship of their shadow guide. One should be careful whom they bestow with their grace. Entrusting others with the loyalty of shadows is the same as sharing one's soul, and thus should not be offered lightly. He could not give Rain any memories. Neither could he give her any echoes. Rain did not possess an aspect or a soul core to encompass them. She certainly did not possess a shadow core to receive one of his shadows. But Serpent was different. Grace of Shadows allowed it to accompany anyone who had a shadow, including a mundane human. So, Sunny transferred Serpent to Rain and commanded it to hide itself unless the girl was in mortal danger. With the help of an ascended devil, she would be able to survive anything. Sunny knew that by providing Rain with his handicap, he might have been stunting her own growth, but he did not care. His sister did not have to grow strong or die. He was more than capable of being strong for the both of them. Looking at her, he smiled. "Well, anyway, don't be a stranger. If you need advice, just message me. You're my only student, after all. So if you suddenly die, my reputation will be ruined. No one will ever hire me as a tutor again." Rain glared at him for a moment, then scoffed. "Why would I die? I'm too smart for that. You, however, make sure not to die yourself. I won't be able to brag that my tutor is a master if you're dead." Sunny grinned, then waved at her and turned away. It was time to leave the city where he had grown up, both for the first time and once again. Chapter 811, Train Ride. Sunny had never thought that he would leave the city one day. He had barely ever thought that there was anything beyond the city, actually. More than that. For him, the city proper itself had always seemed like an alien land. His whole world used to start and end with the outskirts. Tens of millions of people who lived in the outskirts had a very special relationship with the wilderness beyond. They spent their lives much closer to it than real citizens, and were not separated from it by the tall barrier walls that encompassed powerful air filters. On one hand, it made them more attuned to the existence of the outside. On the other hand, they associated the outside with death, disease, and starvation on a much more visceral level. To them, the wilderness meant death in a very practical sense of the word, as opposed to distant and purely theoretical. That was why Sunny felt very weird as he stared at the train that was supposed to take him to the rendezvous point where Master Jet was supposed to meet him. The long-range transcontinental train did not look anything like the light intracity ones Sunny was familiar with. It resembled a massive, heavily armored metal beast that stretched for hundreds and hundreds of meters, its long body composed of various bulky segments. There were passenger carriages, massive cargo carriages, various utility carriages, and even a mobile repair and fabrication unit capable of restoring damaged sections of the railway should the train encounter any hindrances on the way. Rows of large-caliber turret, automated cannons, and gun emplacements rose from the roof, manned by the railroad technicians and security officers. It was a fearsome, moving fortress. Anything less would not have been reliably safe, considering that the government rarely paid attention to the nightmare gates that opened away from population centers. Sonny studied the train curiously for a while, then went ahead and found the carriage he was assigned to. As a master, he was entitled to ride in the lavishly furnished car meant for high-ranking citizens, government officials, and members of legacy clans. He also got a whole cabin to himself. The cabin was comparable in size to his room at the academy, but much better stocked and equipped. Sonny threw his backpack on a shelf and sat down near the window, enjoying the softness of an expensive-looking armchair. A strange expression appeared on his face. Well, as far as wars go, this one is weirdly opulent so far. Of course, he was sure that these luxurious conditions would not last long. No one had bothered him until the train started to move, slowly at first, then faster and faster. Soon the familiar sights of the city and the outskirts flew by, and the great metal beast finally escaped into the wilderness. Sonny felt a solemn mood overcome his senses. Despite spending years of his life in the much more wild and untouched reaches of the dream realm, he somehow felt as if he was stepping outside human civilization for the first time. He held his breath as the various human-built structures disappeared behind. However, the actual landscape of his world did not make any impression on him. It was just sort of boring. The wild expanse of the northern quadrant mostly looked like a desolate, empty place. It was almost entirely made out of mud and snow. Whatever flora still clung to life in the barren soil looked sickly and dull. The sky was heavy and gray, and the air was slightly hazy. Apart from occasional skeletal carcasses of dead nightmare creatures or rusty wrecks left behind from the times of human wars, there was nothing much to look at. Sonny sighed. What a waste. The waking world was not entirely uninhabitable, but it was certainly inhospitable to the species that had once populated its every corner. Maybe Effie had been right. Back when they spoke in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City, he stared through the window for some time, then stood up and walked to a narrow bed, deciding to go to sleep early. This was probably going to be his last opportunity to rest well for a long, long time. It would have been a shame to let the opportunity go. Burying his face in a soft pillow, Sonny closed his eyes and soon fell asleep. At some point during the night, he was awakened by strange vibrations spreading through the frame of the train. Looking up, he saw pale flashes of light outside the window and heard distant, muffled pounding. The turrets on the locomotive and front carriages of the train were firing. Since none of his shadows, which were standing watch, seemed alarmed, Sonny sighed, turned on his other side, and closed his eyes again. Soon he was back to sleep. He dreamt of ice and darkness. In the morning, the train was moving forward as if nothing had happened. Sonny had expected as much, so he wasn't surprised. After freshening up in the small bathroom attached to the cabin, he walked over to the dining car and had a scrumptious breakfast. The cooking could not compete with the instructor's cafeteria at the academy, of course, but it was decent enough. As he ate, Sonny studied the other people present in the carriage. Most of them were government officers and had a military bearing. A few of them were awakened and gave him respectful nods. Even though nothing about Sonny revealed that he was a master, they were able to sense it. Most of these people were probably traveling south for the same reason that he was. They were going to Antarctica as well. So the mood in the dining car was somber. No one talked very much, and those who did kept their voices low. Sonny doubted that all the participants of the massive operation knew the full scope of the disaster that was approaching the southern quadrant. In fact, he was willing to bet that very few were as well informed as he was. More than that, none of them probably had as much battle experience as he had. If they understood the real horror of what was about to come, they wouldn't be so calm. He did not really know how to feel about that. The next morning, the armored train finally reached its destination. Sonny disembarked from the lavish carriage and froze for a moment, staring at the endless gray expanse of restless waves. In front of him was the sea. Chapter 812, Naval Convoy. As Sonny already knew, water was the optimal way of transporting cargo, and people across vast distances. Human civilization had always made use of this property to its benefit. The earliest paths of trade and cultural exchange, and therefore progress, were situated along great rivers, and later shifted to seas and oceans. That had led to many prominent civilization centers being situated along various coasts. However, humanity had regretted that fact dearly when the water slowly crawled forward and devoured all those beautiful, important cities. Even worse, once the nightmare spell appeared, seas and ocean became infested by terrifying nightmare creatures. For that reason, very few populous settlements were situated near water. The further inland they were, the better. Humans still needed to make use of the convenience that only the ocean could provide, though. For that reason, there were many fortified ports in each quadrant. Sunny was looking at one such port. Even after experiencing the dread and grandeur of the forgotten shore and the chained isles, he could not help but feel a bit of awe. The port itself looked like an unassailable fortress, with tall walls rising from the water and various fortifications protruding far into the bleak waves. Colossal cannons were aimed at the horizon, ready to bring down hell on anything that would dare to approach the crowded harbor. Various spell-tech defensive measures brimmed with energy. He had no doubt that even more were hidden underwater. Much more impressive than the port itself, however, were the ships. Sunny froze when he saw them. Around 40 metal leviathans were anchored along the shore, each more than a kilometer long and as tall as a castle. Their hulls bore such thick and heavy armor that it seemed strange for these mountains of steel to stay afloat. Some seemed shiny and new, but most bore deep, giant, ugly scars. Many armor plates were bent and corroded, while some were deformed by some unknown titanic blows. Each ship possessed a plethora of armaments, ranging from heavy artillery cannons to rapid-fire anti-air guns and snub-nosed mortars. Rows of rockets, missiles, and torpedoes could be seen in the hidden nests. The main cannons seemed especially fearsome, most of them resembling oversized railguns that stretched the whole lengths of the vessels. Each of the railguns was capable of propelling a heavy kinetic round with such ferocious speed that barely any human structure would have been able to survive the impact. Maybe not even a whole district would. The ships rested on the water like slumbering giants. Looking at them, Sunny couldn't help but shiver. Humanity was accustomed to regarding the awakened as their most deadly weapon, so it was easy to forget how mighty and destructive mundane people could be with the help of the right technology. Sadly, the technology grew less and less reliable against nightmare creatures of higher ranks. Fallen abominations could more or less shrug off the most devastating of bombardments, while corrupted ones were capable of surviving nuclear blasts. Science couldn't explain the principles at work in these instances, but plenty of empirical evidence had been gathered to ruinous results during the early days of the nightmare spell. So, despite how impressive the 40 steel leviathans looked, Sunny knew that the ships alone were not enough to brave the ocean. Unless they were complemented by awakened fighters and guided by a Nightwalker navigator, even these floating juggernauts weren't capable of surviving the journey to a different quadrant. Still, Sunny couldn't help but admire the silent majesty of them. One thing is certain, that train is nothing, as it turns out. As he stared at the fleet, a familiar voice suddenly called out to him, "Hey, Sunny, welcome to our small port." He turned his head slowly. Master Jet had not changed much. She was still the same, confident, beautiful, with raven black hair and cold, icy blue eyes. Her usual uniform was gone, though, replaced by a deep blue military trench coat. There was a satisfied smile on her lips. The crowd of people parted as she walked closer and glanced at the anchored ships. Impressive, aren't they? Sunny lingered for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, now that I see them, I am starting to understand how we are going to evacuate 800 million people from Antarctica. Soul Reaper shook her head. Don't be so sure. This is just one of the several convoys that is going to sail to the southern quadrant. They are going to deliver the first evacuation army to Antarctica, load up a few millions of refugees, and sail back. If everything goes well, by the time the ships return, the mobilization would have already started. The fleets will bring us reinforcements, take more civilians aboard, and repeat the process as many times as it takes. She sighed. Of course, there's more or less zero chance that everything will go well. Even if it does, it will take us at least a year to gather everyone if we are still alive by then. Who knows, maybe we will be all overwhelmed and devoured by abominations in the first few months. Sunny glanced sideways at her, his expression bleak. You really know how to raise morale, you know. Master Jet grinned. Ah, don't be so serious. In any case, I am really glad that you decided to join the party, Sonny. I really need someone who I can trust by my side. Don't get me wrong, my other subordinates are all honorable and accomplished warriors, but they're not you. He blinked a couple of times. I didn't know I was so special. She looked at him, then shrugged and started walking away, prompting Sonny to follow. It takes a certain kind of person to face the very depths of despair and still continue to fight. You are one such person, Sonny. Soul Reaper glanced at him, then added in a voice that was devoid of any humor. And we will all experience a lot of despair in the coming months. I have a feeling. Chapter 813, First Evacuation Army. Master Jet led him to an armored military PTV that stood a few meters away from the crowded platform. It seemed that vehicle access to this part of the station was heavily restricted, but she paid it no attention. Apparently her rank and status trumped some of the rules. The PTV itself was very different from the civilian models Sonny was accustomed to, as well as the heavier police cruiser he had ridden on occasion in the past. It was much more robust and angular, weighted down by several layers of composite armor, and entirely grounded. Even if the vehicle possessed limited levitation ability, it was perfectly capable of traversing natural terrain on its own. As they entered the cabin, towering humanoid loader robots moved in to unload cargo from the train, piloted by servicemen who could be seen in the open cockpits. The crude exoskeleton platforms were devoid of armor and failed to reach the smoothness of motion, scale, and sophistication of their military siblings, but were more than enough to perform various labor-intensive utility tasks. The PTV roared to life, startling Sonny. It seemed that the distinctions from civilian models were even more pronounced below the surface. The systems propelling the vehicle forward were entirely different, producing much more noise and vibrations, but also raw power. The PTV shot forward, narrowly avoiding several barriers before reaching the primitive cement road that led to the port. As they came closer and closer to the naval fortress, Sonny was able to study the swarm of activity boiling all around it. Currently, the port became a staging ground for a much greater force than it was designed to accommodate. Thousands upon thousands of government servants and soldiers were busy with frantic preparations for the approaching deployment. Numerous recently assembled prefab buildings stood in neat squares, some meant to provide the personnel of the First Evacuation Army with a temporary place to live, some serving as storage depots, production hubs, training facilities, field hospitals, and so on. A lot of heavy machinery was constantly moving between these squares, either transporting cargo or participating in the disassembly of various structures. Despite the impressive scope of the military camp, its makeshift and transient nature was apparent to the naked eye. The army was already busy deconstructing many of the buildings in order to move their components to the holds of the 40 battleships. Thousands of humans swarmed the camp like ants. Sonny saw a lot of non-combatant servicemen hurrying to accomplish their tasks, as well as plenty of soldiers busy with training exercises and drills. Some of them were awakened, but most were mundane humans. There were all types of specialist units in view: engineering corps, mechanized infantry that moved around in fearsome exoskeleton armor suits, artillery vehicle operators, and many more that Sonny could not name. He even saw several mobile war platforms that resembled giant cyclops forged of metal, ranging from 6 to 10 meters in height. These humanoid robots and their pilots left an especially strong impression on him. They were nothing like the primitive loaders he had seen a few minutes ago. Even though Sonny knew that these machines were built and operated by humans, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was looking at hulking nightmare creatures. Slowly, the scale and scope of the upcoming operation started to dawn on him. Sure, he had known the approximate numbers for a long time, but knowing and seeing were two different things. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "You said that there would be several such convoys." Master Jet nodded as she easily controlled the PTV. "Yes, 4 for now. 2 will sail from the northern quadrant, 1 from both the eastern and the western. Each will transport around 100,000 soldiers to Antarctica in the coming month. That will also include around 20,000 awakened and 50 or so masters." She paused and then added, "If the mobilization goes well, we will eventually have at least 60,000 awakened and anywhere between 100 and 300 masters participating in the evacuation efforts." Sonny took a deep breath. These numbers, while the amount of mundane humans being sent to Antarctica was much more immense, it was the latter two that gave him pause. 60,000 might not have seemed like much, but it meant that a quarter of all awakened in the world was going to be concentrated on one continent, and that was without even counting those who had already been based in the southern quadrant. The number of masters was even more unbelievable. 300 was more than a half of all ascended alive today. The government was truly pulling out all the stops. Such might. But was it going to be enough? Sending so many awakened to war would also inevitably leave the other three quadrants with less protection, and their inhabitants more exposed to the vagaries of the nightmare spell. The pressure on the existing infrastructure was bound to increase dramatically after the flood of refugees reached the strongholds of humanity, too. It is all such a mess. Looking at the thousands of people moving around the temporary camp, Sonny couldn't help but wonder how many of them would be coming back. He had no choice but to wonder if he himself would survive as well. Even though the members of the first evacuation army seemed trained and disciplined, he could see hints of fear and uncertainty hidden deep in their eyes. These people might have been dedicated and professional soldiers, but none of them had ever faced the kind of threat they were going to throw themselves against. Soon. Funnily enough, Sonny, despite his young age and lack of a service record, had come much closer to this kind of warfare, and was much better prepared to withstand its horrors than most members of this hastily assembled army. Finally, he felt something that he had not felt even once since learning about the approaching disaster. The weight of responsibility slowly settled on his shoulders. Sonny sighed, and then mentally shook it off. What nonsense is this? He looked at Master Jet, lingered for a moment, and then asked, "So, when do I get a dapper uniform?" Chapter 8 Hwart Hinforn Special Company. Once they entered the confines of the port fortress, the human traffic lessened to a considerable degree. However, there were still plenty of people around, all moving with determined haste. Master Jet parked the PTV near a blocky, low building and opened the hatch to exit. Breathing in the cold winter air, she closed her eyes for a moment and then let out a long sigh. After that, Soul Reaper glanced at him with a grin. "Actually, you arrived just on time. The officer roster of our company is more or less full as of a few days ago, so we were about to hold our first briefing. It was supposed to start half an hour ago, but I postponed to come grab you from the train station." Sonny raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Master Jet nodded. "Everyone more or less only knows as much as you do, so I'll bring all of you up to speed in one go. Granted, the rest had more time to prepare, not to mention the fact that they have been with the government for years. Don't let those old dogs intimidate you, though." Sonny smiled. "Do I look like someone who is easily intimidated?" She glanced at him and laughed. "You do, actually. That is one of your advantages. As far as I'm concerned, being underestimated is always a boon." She walked forward at a brisk pace and said without looking back, "The paperwork can wait for later. We'll get you settled and processed after the briefing. Usually, you would not have been allowed anywhere near the classified information without proper clearance and documentation, but these days proper procedure has taken a back seat to efficiency. Plus, there are very few people who can resist my charm." Sonny hurried to keep up with Master Jet as they entered the low building, after cutting through several checkpoints without anyone daring to look directly at Soul Reaper, let alone say something about the apparent civilian she was dragging into the guts of the military bunker with her. He understood that her status and reputation truly trampled procedure, at least to a large extent. Not only mundane humans, but even awakened treated her with fearful respect. Even an occasional master they walked past seemed to give her face. He hesitated, then asked with curiosity, "Can I ask what, exactly, is your official title in the First Army?" Master Jet glanced at him, then smiled. "Why, I am now Colonel Jet, senior officer of the 1st Awakened Irregular Company of the Northern Quadrant Corps of the Evacuation Army. Kind of a mouthful, huh?" Sonny blinked a couple of times, then reached into his memory of the government force organization and hierarchy. He had studied the topic a bit before leaving the city. Wait, aren't companies supposed to be commanded by captains? Colonel is 3 or 4 ranks above that. It's just one step away from being a general. Soul Reaper nodded. "Usually you would be right. However, titles and authority become messy when Awakened are involved. As a rule of thumb, Awakened are one rank above what they would have been as mundane soldiers. That's just for normal ones, though. As irregulars, we will exist somewhat outside the army hierarchy, so our status was bumped up to reflect that. Sonny scratched the back of his head. Outside the hierarchy? What? He hesitated, then said in a subdued tone, I am not sure what irregulars mean. She flashed him a smile. You will be in a few minutes. Together they entered an elevator that brought them deep underground. Master Jet led him through winding corridors of the military bunker and then pressed the palm of her hand against a complicated biometric lock to open a thick alloy door. Sonny found himself in a spacious chamber that housed a large round table. 5 individuals were already seated around it, quietly waiting for the start of the briefing. When Master Jet entered, they all stood up and saluted her. It was then that Sonny realized that all of them were ascended. 3 of them were men, while the other 2 were women. The oldest master seemed to be nearing his 50s, while the youngest was only slightly older than Soul Reaper. All of them wore serious expressions on their faces and looked at her with somber respect. She waved a hand. At ease. We are all ascended here. There's no need for ceremony. The masters hesitated for a few moments, then relaxed and sat down. Master Jet unbuttoned her navy blue trench coat, then threw it on the backrest of an empty chair. Sonny let out a heavy sigh, then made sure to look somewhere else. His cheek suddenly started to burn, for no apparent reason. As it turned out, his new superior had dismissed her usual uniform in favor of a tight-fitting black bodysuit. In fact, all the masters present in the room were wearing one. It made sense. People like Sonny and them had no need of army-issued armor. They would all be using their memories in the field. A bodysuit like that could easily fit under any type of enchanted armor, so wearing it instead of a uniform was not only more convenient, but also practical. That didn't make it easy on Sonny, though. There were very few places he could rest his eyes on without potentially getting into trouble. It was pure torture. Master Jet sat down, prompting him to do the same. As much as Sonny was flustered by the black bodysuits, the rest of the Ascended were similarly confused by his civilian clothes and age. Finally, one of them glanced at Soul Reaper and asked, Excuse me, ma'am. Who is this young man? Is he your new adjutant? She glanced at them, remained silent for a moment, and then smiled. Gods, no, this young man is Master Sunless, the latest and final addition to the command structure of the First Irregular Company. He is not only one of the youngest humans in history to reach the rank of an Ascended, but also has a kill count higher than most of you combined. So give him a warm welcome, I guess. Chapter 815, First Irregular Company. The 5 Ascended were surprised by such a colorful description, but quickly got over their shock. No one seemed to have doubts about Sonny's credentials, and for a simple reason, there were no weak masters. Every person who had chosen to challenge the second nightmare and survived was an elite by definition. So his rank was the only proof of competence he needed to be accepted by them. That was not to say that these government officers felt threatened by Sonny's accomplishments. All of them were experienced, battle-tested fighters, specialists. They had well-deserved confidence in their own capabilities. Master Jet looked at them and smiled. Since we have already started, let's get introductions out of the way. Some of you may know each other, while others are relatively new faces. She went down the line, introducing each of the Ascended that were going to serve as the backbone of the First Irregular Company. The oldest among them was a muscular man that seemed to be in his late 40s or early 50s. Of course, as an Ascended, he looked incredibly well for his age. Master Randall was mature and grizzled, with gray hair and a full beard that perfectly suited his chiseled, masculine face. The black bodysuit lay snug against his well-pronounced muscles. Everything about the man told that he was a seasoned, consummate soldier. His presence was solid and steady. Master Randall might have not fought side by side with the members of the first generation when the spell had appeared, but due to his age, he most likely witnessed its descent as a child. His well of experience was of great benefit to the company. In fact, one would have expected him to be in charge instead of Soul Reaper. However, even if the man had any thoughts about that matter, he did not let them show. The gorgeous woman sitting next to him stood out among the group of masters due to her good-natured, friendly demeanor. Ascended Jessie looked almost like the opposite of Master Jet. She had straw blonde hair, a healthy tan, sparkling blue eyes, and radiated a strange feeling of warmth. Coincidentally, she was the closest to Soul Reaper in terms of age. No one would have called the beautiful blonde soft, though. Her tall, slender body brimmed with energy and barely suppressed strength. The relaxed attitude hit a sharp and cutting edge. This master seemed to be not only enthusiastic about life, but also about combat and the carnage of battle. She was a formidable warrior without a doubt. So were the others. The third woman among the officers of the company was called Ascended Winter. She was in her late 30s and seemed to be the most calm of the group. Her curly hair was dark brown and tied into a simple ponytail. Sunny didn't know what color her eyes were because, strangely, the woman wore a pair of polarized sunglasses even though they were all currently deep underground. She sat on her chair in a pose so relaxed that it almost seemed inappropriate for this important meeting. Her beautiful face was aloof and nonchalant. The sleeves of her bodysuit were rolled up, revealing toned forearms and a solid tattoo that turned one of them completely black. If not for the fact that Master Winter had stood up to salute Soul Reaper when they entered, Sunny would have thought that she was fast asleep. The man next to her seemed to have the same tattoo, hinting that they were, or had been, members of the same unit in the past. He was of the same age as his female colleague, with honest eyes and a gallant bearing. There was dark stubble on his handsome face and black circles under his eyes. Ascended Dale seemed like a steady, stalwart warrior. Sunny did not know for sure, but felt that the man's aspect had at least some relation to defense and protection. He sensed that if Master Dale decided to stand his ground, very few things in the world would have been able to move him. The last officer of the first irregular company was slightly older and stood in stark contrast to Master Dale. His cold eyes, inexpressive face, and chilling gaze all expressed one thing. Ascended Davis was a killer. He seemed like the most offense-oriented master of the bunch, but that quality was not without subtlety. On the contrary, it seemed to be shrewd, quiet, and absolutely deadly. Sunny suspected that Davis was what he himself had once wished to be. The kind of fighter who utilized cunning and stealth to destroy the enemy with one surgical strike, thus avoiding the trouble of having to withstand retaliation. Together with Sunny and Jet, the 5 masters were going to lead the first irregular company. Coincidentally, just like Soul Reaper, each of the 5 Ascended had a nickname. Masters Randall, Jesse, Winter, Dale, and Davis were also known as Vandal, Mustang, Queen, Knight, and Pride. Sunny was the only person without one, which made him feel slightly jealous. Well, I can always go by Mongrel. He blinked. What? No. That's a terrible nickname, and an even worse idea. Who said that he even needed a nickname? He was perfectly fine being called Sunny anyway. After the initial introductions were complete, Master Jet glanced at them again and said, "We will get to know each other's aspects and combat capabilities later. It is not too important for now anyway, since I expect all of you to act independently of the rest more often than not. Now, let's get down to business. Today, I will bring you up to speed about the projected composition of the first irregular company, our purpose, and guiding military doctrine." She pressed something on her communicator, and a large projection appeared in the middle of the table. Sunny studied the large archipelago with a prominent landmass in the east. Master Jet lingered for a moment, and then continued. "But to do that, you will have to understand the general shape of the upcoming operation. As all of you already know, this is Antarctica." She gestured at the projection. All Antarctica is divided into 3 parts. Chapter 816, 3 phases. Master Jet gestured to the projection. All of Antarctica is divided into 3 parts. West Antarctica, East Antarctica, and the Antarctic Center. West Antarctica was mostly submerged in water and consisted of a scattering of islands, some of them small, some of them large. East Antarctica was one large landmass that was peppered by numerous lakes, with a prominent mountain chain in the middle of it. The Antarctic Center was a long, narrow landmass that rested between the two, occupied almost entirely by tall mountains. Soul Reaper continued. West Antarctica is mostly devoid of human population, so it presents little interest to us. The Antarctic Center is an administrative and technological hub of the quadrant, while East Antarctica is the largest and most densely populated region of the continent. She paused for a moment and then added somberly, The first evacuation army is going to set sail in 2 weeks. We will reach Antarctica 2, maybe 3 weeks after that. By that time, the chain of nightmares would already be starting. Local garrisons are already experiencing an increased number of manifesting gates, but the number will explode by the end of March. After that, it will only keep growing. Master Jet stared at the projection for a bit, and then said calmly, "No matter how many soldiers we send, we won't be able to contain the flood of nightmare creatures that enter through these gates. This is something that had never happened in history before. Even the great wars that the first generation fought pale in comparison to the chain of nightmares. Don't forget that almost all abominations back then were of the dormant rank. We aren't that lucky." She sighed, then leaned back and crossed her arms. "According to our scientists and diviners, the mass of gates is going to be of the second category and third categories. That means awakened, fallen, and even corrupted nightmare creatures, in numbers greater than anything we have seen. Of course, something even worse can happen, so we are not going to try and contain them." The faces of the master slowly grew dim. Noticing it, Soul Reaper shook her head. "There are better ways to achieve our objective. Once the army makes landfall, it will split into 3 parts, with each part pursuing a distinct objective during the first phase of the operation. One of the objectives is to turn a small number of select cities into fortified evacuation centers that can withstand the siege of nightmare creatures for months or even years ahead." Master Jet pointed at several points on the map, then continued. "The second objective is to relocate all external human population to these centers, where they will wait for their turn to board the ships. Neither the relocation nor the wait are going to be a short process. Finally, the third objective is to establish and maintain the evacuation corridors for the relocating citizens. Once everyone is safely behind the established perimeter of siege strongholds, the first phase of the operation will be considered to be complete." Sunny tentatively raised a hand. "Yes." He glanced at other masters with a dubious expression, then asked, "Why are we waiting for the disaster to strike before starting to evacuate people? Wouldn't it be easier to get at least some of them out right now?" Soul Reaper gave him a rueful smile. "That is because everyone was convinced that the event won't happen for at least a few more years. Our level of preparation is wholly inadequate, and there are no established means to start the evacuation prematurely. In short, the government was caught with its pants down. The deployment of the First Army is a messy and slapdash affair, which means that a lot more soldiers are going to die as the result. Make no mistake, though, this is the best we can do, considering the situation." Sunny sighed, then nodded in understanding. Master Jet glanced at him and continued, "After the first phase of the operation is complete, the second one will commence. By then, the second evacuation army should be already fully formed and arrive to reinforce the depleted First Army. This phase is simple, which is not to say easy. We will pull back all our forces to the siege capitals and hold them for as long as it takes to evacuate every civilian. After that, the third phase will result in a complete exodus of humans from Antarctica and the consequent heavy continental bombardment. The southern quadrant will cease to exist." She took a poignant pause, then smiled darkly. "That is the gist of the operation in broad strokes. Now for details, as you must have already surmised from the name of our company, it is going to play a special role throughout all 3 phases of the evacuation. The first irregular company will not be tied to any existing battalion, regiment, or division. We will not be supporting or leading any of the grunt soldiers. Instead, we will act as elite irregulars." Soul Reaper leaned forward and looked at them with her icy blue eyes. "Each of you will be in charge of a cohort of some of the best awakened warriors in the government employ. The cohorts will act semi-independently and respond to any overwhelming obstacle that threatens to slow down the evacuation. Whenever the mundane soldiers or their awakened counterparts encounter a problem that they can't handle, we will be sent to resolve the situation through any means necessary." The room suddenly became very cold, and so did Master Jet's expression. "What it means is that we will be thrown into the most dire, bloody, and hopeless flashpoints of the entire operation on a consistent basis. Unlike regular soldiers who will most likely have time to rest and recover between battles, we will be enduring a constant succession of rapid combat deployments until the evacuation is completed, or until we all die. That is why the first irregular company was not only allocated 7 Ascended, but also why these Ascended are the absolute best we have. Each of you is an elite among elites, Make that count." She studied the faces of her subordinates, and then raised an eyebrow. "Any questions?" Master Winter suddenly raised a hand, revealing that she was not, in fact, asleep. When she spoke, her voice was unexpectedly relaxed. "What's our logistics situation? Is there going to be food, or are we going to spend months chewing on monster meat? You know, like usual." Chapter 817, Captain Sunless. The briefing lasted for a while longer. The 7 Ascended of the First Irregular Company had a lot of things to discuss, and while a few nuances went over Sonny's head, he slowly gained a better understanding of the upcoming ordeal. That said, each of them had way too much to do before the naval convoy left for the southern quadrant. So wasting precious time on long conversations was not in anyone's interest. Eventually, the 5 masters left, leaving Sonny and Jet alone in the meeting room. There was a grim expression on his face. Sonny sighed, then glanced at his superior. "I am not going to lie. All of this seems a bit overwhelming." Soul Reaper smiled and shook her head dismissively. "Don't be too concerned. You already have the necessary experience and qualifications to make things work. It is not like the others are better prepared to deal with something of that scope. Above all, we will need the ability to swiftly learn and adapt. That is how we will survive this unprecedented mess of a disaster." He looked at the ceiling with a thoughtful expression. Well, when Master Jet put it like that, yes, it made sense to say that he was qualified to face the challenges of the Chain of Nightmares. The other irregulars might have been older and more experienced, but no one had ever lived through something like that. In the absence of relevant experience, adaptability was arguably more important. In that regard, his young age and flexible mindset could even be called an advantage. Plus, Sonny had always excelled at being able to adapt to anything. Soul Reaper stood up and beckoned as she headed for the exit. "Come on, let's get you settled." They moved to a different level of the bunker, where some sort of administrative center had been hastily established in recent weeks. The military admins were even busier than the soldiers above ground. An atmosphere of feverish, barely contained chaos hung in the air as hundreds of officers tried to juggle tens of thousands of issues as they prepared the army for departure. Maybe because of this haste, or maybe because of Master Jet's presence, the paperwork did not take long. To Sonny's astonishment, it took less than half an hour for him to officially become a government agent and an officer of the 1st Evacuation Army. He was issued the rank of a captain, along with all the status and privileges of one. Sonny couldn't help but blink a couple of times. Captain Sunless, damn. It has a nice ring to it. Without wasting any time, they moved to another level, where Sonny was issued with a basic set of gear corresponding to his rank. Among other things, he also received the ubiquitous black bodysuit. His communicator was already of a high-grade government model, so it simply received an extensive software upgrade. As they waited for all the routine procedures to be performed, Sonny and Master Jet quietly discussed business. "So what exactly happens now?" She looked at him for a few moments. "Well, you will have to do a lot of things to get ready for Antarctica. Don't worry too much and take it one step at a time." Soul Reaper paused. "First things first. In the next few days, you will have to make several important decisions. Don't rush and really think matters through before committing to a choice. However, don't wait too long either. The longer you take, the less time you'll have to accomplish other tasks." She gestured to his communicator. "All the necessary features and permissions have already been added to your comm. Your credentials should have been added into the system as well, so you can access the data through it." Sonny checked the new features added to the operating system of his communicator and nodded. "So what exactly are these decisions?" Master Jet smiled. "First of all, you are an officer of an elite combat unit now. The members of the 1st Irregular Company are entitled to receive a fair share of rare equipment and precious resources that the government has to offer. That said, each cohort is unique and has special demands. To make sure that you and your soldiers are outfitted with not only great tools, but also ones that suit them best, a very generous amount of contribution points has been added to your personal balance." She gestured to one of the symbols on the screen of his communicator. "Your cohort will be provided with a basic set of assets, but on top of that, you will be able to customize them or acquire additional equipment yourself. You can peruse what the logistics and supply has to offer through that interface, as well as claim whatever you choose. Of course, the inventory available to the first irregular company is much more robust and exclusive than what mundane units have access to. Soul Reaper sighed wistfully. What you settle on is at your discretion. You can decide to upgrade your personal gear with powerful tools, memories, or even echoes. You can choose to equip your soldiers with better equipment instead. You can assign most points to comprehensively upgrade the technical assets provided to your cohort. Hell, you can even convert all the contribution points into credits and transfer them to your personal account. Not that I would advise doing something like that, of course. Sonny's eyes glistened. If there was one thing he loved, it was receiving free stuff. Even if most of the contribution points would go into strengthening his cohort, it was still a great opportunity to soothe his greed. He was sure that the government had a lot of amazing stuff in its coffers. The decision to enlist was already starting to look much more appealing. There was one problem, however. He gave Master Jet a curious look. I can't really fine-tune gear and equipment to the needs of my cohort if I don't have a cohort, though. Right? She nodded. Indeed. Actually, that is the second set of decisions. Chapter 8108, 8181E Irregulars, Assemble. Master Jet pointed at another new symbol on the screen of his communicator. The process is basically the same. You can shop for members of the cohort through your comm. Well, not really. Contribution points have nothing to do with the selection, of course. There is a pool of elite awakened fighters that have been transferred to this port. The first irregular company has priority right to recruit 42 of them, 6 per cohort. As the youngest captain, you get the first pick. Sonny stared at the screen, deep in thought. So, the first thing he had to do was to pick 6 awakened that would become his soldiers during the Antarctica campaign. He had no doubt that each of them was an elite warrior among the government forces, but being a good fighter was not enough. Creating a strong cohort was no small feat. Its members not only had to be able to pull their own weight, but also meet a long list of needs that a combat unit possessed. This was especially true for the 7 cohorts that were going to comprise the first irregular company, since each of them was expected to operate independently. In a sense, this approach was more familiar to him. Awakened serving a large force were able to specialize within the confines of their units. One cohort could do especially well in melee combat, but lack the means of dealing damage from range. Another cohort could specialize in attacking exclusively from distance. By working together, these different units were able to shore up each other's weaknesses and allow the soldiers to express their greatest strengths. An independent cohort was very different. Although it could possess a specialization, it had to be well-rounded and excel in various aspects by necessity. This is how most cohorts in the Dream Realm functioned, and what Sonny was familiar with. In any case, choosing 6 awakened that could fulfill a multitude of roles while synergizing with each other was a daunting task. There was a lot of factors he would have to consider. And after that, he had to assume command of these strangers and lead them into battle after battle. Their survival was his responsibility. Their deaths, should any of his soldiers fall, would be on his conscience too. Sonny let out a long sigh, then looked at Master Jet. Any advice? She lingered for a few moments, then nodded. No matter how good these elites are, you will still be the core element and the deadliest weapon of the cohort. Don't neglect variability, but choose those whose aspects complement yours. Sonny smiled. That won't be a problem. I might not excel in any one thing, but at the same time I am sort of a jack of all trades. While my aspect leans toward utility, I can do a bit of everything. That leaves me at a disadvantage in some situations, but it also means that I can work well with a great variety of awakened. Anyone can benefit from having me by their side, and vice versa. Master Jet thought for a few moments. Versatility is a strength in and of itself, since you are not limited by a narrow focus. The best course of action would be to assemble a well-balanced group of fighters that can respond to any situation with a high level of effectiveness. That will actually make my job a bit easier, since I'll be able to send your cohort to solve a wider variety of problems. She lingered for a bit, and then added, if there is one piece of advice I can give, it's to not neglect utility in favor of direct combat strength. Antarctica, no matter how prepared we think we are, it is going to test us in ways that no one expects. Things will go wrong, and then go from bad to worse. Mobility, survival, mental resilience, all these things and plenty others might turn out to be much more important than we think. It is also going to be a long, cruel, and punishing campaign. Keep that in mind. Sunny sighed. Long, cruel, and punishing. That was basically the description of most of his experiences with the nightmare spell. That was nothing new. He stared at his communicator for a bit, then asked, "What about after I've assembled the cohort? Most of these soldiers are probably older than me. They are also devoted government servants, while I am somewhat of a hired mercenary. I doubt that they will be happy to be under command of someone like me instead of one of the other distinguished masters." Soul Reaper shook her head. "You are not exactly correct. Sure, you are younger than the other captains of our company. Some might see it as a weakness, but at the same time it's a sign of excellence and greater potential. After all, none of us managed to ascend before turning 20. I am considered somewhat of a prodigy, and you beat my record by 5 years. So, I don't expect these soldiers to show reluctance to respect your command." She paused, then added in a serious tone, "However, there is a great difference between being able to issue orders and being able to inspire confidence. There is no easy method to make your soldiers follow you, not simply obey you. You will have to find a way to win their loyalty on your own, Sonny." Master Jet smiled. "However, I don't think that it will be too hard. Once we reach Antarctica, things will fall into place. Lead them to victory, keep them alive, and they'll learn to trust you." Sonny thought for a bit, then nodded. Actions spoke louder than words. He might face some resistance at the start, but battle would swiftly resolve everything. Either he would win his soldiers over, or all 7 of them would die. In any case, the problem was going to disappear. Soul Reaper briefly gripped his shoulder, and then said, "Anyway, I don't think you should worry about these matters yet. You have plenty of other issues to solve, no matter how professional and prepared these guys are. Forming a strong cohort takes more than simply assembling all its members together. You will all have to learn how to fight side by side and leverage your unique powers to form good synergy. Well, I don't have to tell you, you're not a novice." Sonny scratched the back of his head. "Yeah, I have some experience with that." She sighed. "Do remember that you will only have 3, maybe 4 weeks left to prepare. That is not nearly enough time to deepen the cooperation level of the cohort, but do as much as you can. There will be proper training facilities aboard the ships, so don't stop working until we make landfall." Sonny looked at her with a serious expression. "I won't." Master Jet nodded, then waved a hand. "Well, I bet you have enough to think about. I'll leave you to it then. Don't take too much time deciding on who you want to recruit. The sooner you settle that, the sooner you can start bringing your cohort to shape and spending those sweet contribution points." He smiled, and looked as she turned around and disappeared into one of the corridors of the underground bunker. Then, Sonny lowered his gaze and studied the screen of his communicator. He had a lot to think about indeed. Chapter 819, Alloy Beast. The room provided to Sonny was a far cry from the luxurious cabin he had enjoyed on the train. It was small, Spartan, and lacked windows due to being located deep underground. The designers of the military bunker did not even install a false one, so the walls lacked the lifelike projections of the outside. Not that Sonny cared about such things. In fact, he quite liked the solid nature of his temporary quarters. Perhaps things would have been different if he did not possess the ability to escape to the surface with the help of Shadow Step, but since he did, the fear of being buried under countless tons of stone and soil was not bothering him too much. The room reminded him of his hidden lair in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City, which was a pleasant bonus. Sitting on a narrow bed, Sonny sighed and projected the screen of his communicator on the opposite wall. Leaning back, he then got lost in thought for a few minutes. In the next day or so, he would have to make a lot of important decisions. There were a lot of things to consider. While the task seemed daunting, he was rather excited to start. It's like playing a game only without checkpoints and real human lives at stake, including mine. So, I guess nothing like a game, actually. The first thing he did was acquaint himself with the default set of assets provided to his future cohort by the government. This generous and highly optimized array of premium gear and equipment included everything to cover the basic needs of his unit during their deployment in Antarctica, from thermoregulated outerwear to priceless spell-tech medical kits and beyond. The centerpiece of the set was, without a doubt, an advanced all-terrain personnel carrier that was going to serve as the mobile home of his cohort in the future. This heavily armored transport vehicle resembled an angular, high-tech mix between a turtle and a rhinoceros. Of course, Sonny only knew what a rhinoceros was because he had looked up the extinct beast after learning that the APC was colloquially known as rhino. It was hard to believe that the massive thing was an actual animal and not a strange nightmare creature. Despite its prodigious size and thick armor, the Rhino armored personnel carrier was capable of moving with immense speed across various terrains. It could even climb mountains without too much problem, provided that the driver knew what they were doing. The advanced variant provided to the cohorts of the first irregular company was additionally modified with even more robust armor, inordinately powerful engines, enhanced internals, and a sophisticated command and communications suite. Of course, there was always room for improvement. In fact, the interface offered Sonny a lot of opportunities to enhance the APC much further. These additional augmentations were going to cost him a lot of contribution points, however. Still, he was inclined to believe that they would be worth it. The armored vehicle was not only going to be responsible for keeping his cohort mobile, it would also serve as the logistical core of their deployment. Its importance was already apparent due to the fact that the default set of assets provided by the government was based on its carrying capacity. The logistics and supply officers in charge of compiling this array of gear were not familiar with the covetous coffer, of course. Thanks to his loyal toothy chest, Sonny would be able to more or less double his cohort's storage space. That alone gave him a lot of flexibility as far as spending contribution points on additional equipment was concerned. The tech is important, however, it is also unreliable. Gates were known to mess with technology in various ways. The military vehicle certainly included several measures to minimize that effect, but it would still be prudent of him to beef this aspect up. After all, no one knew what would happen if dozens or even hundreds of gates came to exist in the area around the APC at the same time. That was something for Sonny to think about later, however. Now that he knew what he was dealing with, he had a clearer picture of what kind of awakened he wanted to recruit. Closing one interface and opening another, he rubbed his temples and sighed. That is not going to be easy. Soon enough, hundreds of concise dossiers were in front of him, each containing the personnel file of one of the best awakened soldiers stationed in the port. Most of them were going to be assigned to other units, while 42 would become members of the elite First Irregular Company. 6 of them would be his own subordinates. For a while, Sonny was paralyzed by all the choices. Each dossier contained the description of the Awakened's aspect and abilities, their service record and psychological profile, as well as of additional skills and specializations that the soldier might have mastered and other information. His task was to pick 6 warriors who would not only comprise a well-rounded cohort and complement his own powers, but also work well with each other both in terms of combat ability and interpersonal compatibility. The former was already hard enough, but the latter gave him a headache. Luckily, very few people working for the government possessed contrarian and antisocial personalities. People who chose the life of service were predisposed to having a certain level of agreeableness by definition. Unlike Sonny, he was contrarian and antisocial enough to balance out their agreeableness all by himself. One thing that the files did not include, regretfully, was detailed information about the flaws of these elite soldiers. Not even the government servants were comfortable sharing something like that with their employer. Each file only mentioned how severe the flaw had been judged to be through passive observation, and sometimes an approximate evaluation of its specific effects. Which was a shame. A serious enough flaw could derail any battle plan. Just out of curiosity, Sonny looked up the dossiers of the other ascended captains. Vandal, Mustang, Queen, Knight, and Pride as well. Their files were also there, although in a much more redacted version. Reading what little was left unredacted, he couldn't help but whistle. Impressive. Master Jet's personal file was even more obscure. Pretty much everything except for her name and rank was blacked out. His own dossier was rather short and mostly consisted of question marks. Either the government truly knew so little about him or simply chose not to show how well they were informed. Well, at least they got my height right. Sonny closed the file and shook his head. He could not allow himself to delay the task any further. He was in for a long and sleepless night. Chapter 820, Importance of Utility. Sunny knew what he needed, more or less. A couple of frontline fighters, a couple of ranged specialists, someone to provide utility. A healer, ideally, although even among these elites there were too few. Fortunately, Sunny himself possessed a wide range of versatile abilities that could cover many needs of the cohort. He was able to fight up close or at range. He could scout or flank the enemies by using shadow step. He could use shadow manifestation to accomplish a multitude of tasks. Still, covering all the basics was not enough. The Antarctica campaign was promising to be long and grueling, maybe even unbearable. He had no doubt that they would face all kinds of nightmare creatures, from landbound to aerial to aquatic. Some of them were going to try and kill them with brutal force, some would employ more insidious means. To ensure the best chances of survival, the cohort had to be strong, balanced, and capable of accomplishing more than the sum of its parts would suggest. They had to be able to work together and respond to all kinds of threats. Even with several hundred candidates, he was not sure how possible it was to build something as formidable as his own cohort had been, both on the Forgotten Shore and the Chained Isles. First things first. Although some would have been tempted to go for offensive powerhouses first, Sunny made a different opinion. He filtered the dossiers, allowing only those of awakened with utility aspects to remain. Master Jet had been right, although pure combat strength was immensely important. A war was often lost or won off the battlefield. As far as Sunny was concerned, utility was just as vital. His own experience confirmed it. Back on the Forgotten Shore, fighters like Nephis and Castor had shone so bright that everyone paid them all the attention. People like Sunny and Cassie remained more or less unnoticed. However, they had contributed as much, if not more, to the cohort's survival. Yes, those with pure combat aspects played a larger role in direct confrontations with the nightmare creatures. But it was only because Sunny had scouted ahead that they had been able to avoid battling swarms of abominations that would have overwhelmed them in an instant. Cassie's uncanny intuition and affinity to revelation had saved them too many times to count. It had helped the cohort avoid lethal dangers that often could not be seen, let alone slain with a blade. Not paying enough attention to utility would have been a grave mistake. More than that, this choice would allow Sunny to handpick other members of the cohort to suit the ensuing situation. The first decision would widen and define the cohort's foundation, making the rest easier to make. He spent a lot of time reading through dozens of dossiers. There were all kinds of talented awakened that possessed incredible abilities. Eventually, Sunny narrowed the selection to just 3 of the most interesting candidates. A mature and experienced awakened caught his eye due to the ability to move and shape Earth as if it was a liquid, and then swiftly turn it back to solid state. With his help, the cohort would be able to literally shape the battlefield to stack the odds in their favor. While that ability was too slow and weak to deal direct damage, Sunny could imagine building all types of funnels, defensive walls, and trenches with the man's help. Hell, in certain situations, they would even be able to turn the ground into quicksand, trapping multiple abominations or at least reducing the mobility of the enemy. Their own mobility was also an issue. No matter how versatile the Rhino was, there would be situations without a doubt where its incredible all-terrain maneuverability would fail. The ability to create a road was going to come in extremely handy at that time. Another government elite seemed even more useful. This tall and athletic man was capable of creating stable, short-distance spatial rifts. Basically, he could allow the fighters of the cohort to teleport around the battlefield with impunity. Sunny did not have to think long to understand how incredible this ability was. He had used Shadow Step to vanquish his foes numerous times, and granting the same advantage to the whole cohort was an indescribably potent tool. Hell, he didn't even have to send people through this rift. Throwing a spell-tech grenade or a manifestation of a sorceress aspect ability would wreak havoc among the enemies just as well. The third candidate was a young woman with mousy hair and an unassuming face. Her ability seemed less potent than that of the 2 men, but could also be quite useful in the right situations. Just like Cassie, the young woman possessed an affinity to revelations, albeit a much lesser one. While she couldn't compete with Song of the Fallen in the broadness of application, the narrow focus of her aspect was capable of producing more palpable results. The young woman was able to perceive weaknesses and vulnerabilities of living creatures, as well as share visual perception among several people. She too could comprehensively enhance the cohort's battle effectiveness, although in a less direct way. Sonny spent a long time staring at the three dossiers. Which one should he choose? Each held incredible value in his eyes. He was even tempted to claim all three. But no. While Sonny was not blind to the importance of utility, he needed powerful fighters to make use of it. Without offensive strength, the cohort would be simply unable to act on the provided opportunities. Plus, his own aspect already leaned toward utility. Eventually, he dismissed the dossiers of the two men and left only the image of the meek young woman with mousy hair on the wall. Awakened Kim. The more Sonny stared at her portrait, the more he was sure of his choice. Yes, the first candidate could shape the battlefield to their advantage, but Sonny was able to achieve a bit of that himself with the help of shadow manifestation. Yes, the second candidate could provide an indescribable tactical flexibility to the cohort. However, the short range and the stationary nature of the spatial rifts was not easy to exploit in the chaotic and unpredictable mayhem of combat. Awakened Kim, on the other hand, could provide a powerful boost to any offensive action. Her abilities synergized with the widest variety of aspects, including Sonny's own. More than that, unlike the other two soldiers, her powers scaled with the threat. Being able to create a wall of stone was useless if the enemy could turn stone to dust. Being able to attack an abomination from the flank would accomplish nothing if the abomination was of a high enough rank to become immune to awakened weapons. Being able to see the vulnerabilities of the enemy, however, would be a boon for the cohort no matter how powerful of an enemy they faced. In fact, the more dire their foe, the more important Awakened Kim's ability could become. There was also another, much simpler reason why Sonny decided to choose the third candidate. The young woman could share visual perception between multiple people. Antarctica, meanwhile, enjoyed an uninterrupted night that lasted for several months. What it meant was that the first irregular company would be fighting in near-complete darkness for at least 4 months after arriving into the southern quadrant. While this problem could be somewhat solved with technology, there was a better and more reliable solution. Sonny could see in the dark, and with Awakened Kim's help, his soldiers would share in this ability too. He looked at the dossier one last time and nodded. Good. This young woman was going to be the first cornerstone of his cohort. Chapter 821, Offense Pillars. Now that Sonny knew what kind of logistical and combat support his cohort would be able to enjoy, thanks to him, Awakened Kim, and the heavily armored Rhino, he had a tentative understanding of what direction he had to follow. In the next several hours, he carefully studied hundreds of dossiers, slowly narrowing the list of potential candidates. By the time the night was drawing to a close, he was more or less ready to make the final selection. Of course, ideally, Sonny would have preferred to meet the recruits face to face and put them through a gauntlet to get to know their characters, styles, and limits better. But in the current situation, being able to study their personnel files was already good enough. He had chosen several important traits that most, or better yet, each of the candidates had to possess. First of all, Sonny decided to favor sustainability and lasting battlefield presence over pure might and burst damage potential. Sure, many of the elite government soldiers possessed awesome aspect abilities that could deliver truly fearsome results in a short span of time. However, these Awakened also burned through essence with a frightening speed. The Antarctica campaign promised to be a marathon, or rather a marathon stacked on top of a marathon, stacked on top of a marathon, stacked on top of a marathon. Longevity was king. He vastly preferred fighting side by side with people who could maintain their peak battle state for long stretches of time, even if their immediate combat performance was not as impressive. Secondly, he deliberately paid more attention to fighters who implemented higher than usual amounts of finesse, calculation, and cunning in their approach to combat. Not only were such people better at conserving their energy, but they also suited his own inclinations very well. Additionally, fighters like these were bound to make better use of Awakened Kim's ability to recognize vulnerabilities of the enemy. The third and last trait he sought out was mental fortitude. No government elite was a slouch in terms of determination and resilience, but some stood out among all others. Most of them were those Awakened who had gone through crushing defeats, but were nevertheless able to pick themselves up and grow stronger for it. Sonny was more or less certain that he had endured more torment and hopelessness than even the other ascended captains of the first irregular company. As such, he had a better idea of how ruthless and punishing the long campaign in the southern quadrant could turn out to be. So, even if it meant settling for someone with less power or talent, he was determined to pick the most dogged and tenacious of the awakened elites. In the end, 6 dossiers remained projected on the wall of his small room. Awakened Kim had been his first choice. This young woman was the cornerstone of the cohort due to her valuable aspect, which allowed her to reveal the weaknesses of the enemy and share visual perception among herself and her allies. Additionally, she was a certified technician who could look after the cohort's armored personnel carrier and perform field repairs if need be. His second choice was a charismatic man in his late 20s. Awakened Bell had a lean figure, athletic build, and blonde hair. His expression on the portrait attached to the dossier was laid back and slightly carefree. Bell was a talented swordsman who excelled in offense and agility. His aspect made him especially deadly. The young swordsman was able to turn his body intangible and phase through solid matter. Despite the fact that he couldn't maintain this state for long, even a second was enough to avoid an enemy attack if used at the right moment. His second ability allowed him to infuse his weapon with unnatural sharpness and cut through most obstacles. Although the second ability devoured soul essence with terrible speed, Awakened Bell was incredibly proficient in using both of them in precise, short bursts. He only needed a fraction of a second to dodge a strike or deliver a killing blow, so there was no need to maintain them for more than that. As the result, he was able to last much longer on the battlefield than the description of his aspect would suggest. Bell was going to be one of the 2 pillars of Sunny's melee vanguard. The second pillar was a man named Dorn. Looking at his portrait, Sunny couldn't help but grimace. No, this is just ridiculous. Awakened Dorn was a giant of a man. He was easily taller than Effie and possessed robust musculature to boot. Just one look at him would have made most people feel small and feeble. The only consolation that Sunny could find was that this powerhouse would be fighting on his side. Dorn's weapon of choice was a hammer. And not a traditional war hammer, which, despite its usual portrayal in popular media, was actually a relatively light and elegant weapon. No, Awakened Dorn preferred to fight with something that could only be described as an enchanted version of a sledgehammer. This heavy 2-handed implement of destruction was able to crush flesh, bone, stone, and steel with equal ease. All that would have made one think that the man was a straightforward and single-minded brawler, with a penchant for solving problems through brute force, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Instead, the man possessed a serious, sedate attitude and deeply intelligent eyes. His aspect could be described in 3 words: push and pull. Awakened Dorn was able to manipulate gravity, or at least something that resembled gravity, to empower his strikes with crushing weight and throw his enemies off balance. By combining these 2 effects in a precise and calculated manner, he was able to make use of both to vastly elevate the potency of his attacks. No matter how strong and enduring Dorn's body was, no one would have been able to wildly swing his heavy weapon around for too long. That was why he preferred to conserve his stamina and kill the enemy with one crushing, deliberate, well-timed, and devious strike. In short, despite his ridiculous size, Awakened Dorn was a man after Sunny's own heart. Together, Bell and Dorn were going to be the core of the cohort's battle formation. However, there was another person whom Sunny intended to add to the melee vanguard. Chapter 822, Shadow Cohort. The third member of the melee vanguard was, perhaps, the second most important person in the cohort, after Sunny himself, of course. He had agonized over that choice a lot, but eventually settled on a handsome and chivalrous man named Quentin. Awakened Quentin preferred wearing full-plate armor and wielding a sword and a shield. Unlike Bell and Dorn, he was not going to be serving as an offensive powerhouse. He was going to become the defensive bulwark of the melee vanguard, which was not to say that he wasn't a deadly fighter in his own right, of course. Quentin's aspects centered around restoration and corrosion. In battle, he was able to continuously repair his shield and his armor, no matter what kind of damage they received. There were limits to this ability, of course, but as long as his memories weren't outright destroyed, they would eventually regain their original shape. He was also able to apply a corrosive property to his weapons. The corrosion was not very potent, but as long as enough of his attacks landed, The enemy was bound to eventually succumb under the weight of accumulating decay. This was a slow but insidious and impactful ability. However, it was the first one that made awakened Quentin so valuable. That was because he was not limited to restoring only memories. Quentin's restoration was near universal and could repair various things, including human flesh. He was a healer. Of course, as far as these rare specialists went, he wasn't the most powerful. His ability was comparatively slow and limited. Quentin could not even hope to compete with someone like Nephis or Elias in terms of speed and efficiency, and even among other healers whose dossiers were available to Sunny, his restorative power did not stand out. But after thinking about it for a long time, Sunny still decided to go with Quentin. He did not want to employ a more potent healer, if that meant that the healer would not be able to fend for themselves in a furious fight. Even though his final choice was somewhat mediocre in terms of healing wounds, the chivalrous man was a more well-rounded and versatile combatant. Sunny was inspired to make that choice by his memories of Shim, the firekeeper healer who had eventually inherited the leadership over Cassie's personal cohort. Despite his lack of a combat aspect, Shim always fought on the front line and supported his companions with his blade, his shield, and his steady presence. Plus, Quentin was also a trained combat medic who possessed deep knowledge of modern medicine. He could even use his ability to help repair the rhino, should Kim be unable to do it through mundane means. Overall, Sunny was happy with his decision. With 4 members of the cohort already chosen, only 2 spots remained. Knowing that he would have to strengthen the ability of his soldiers to attack the enemies from distance and fight against flying abominations, Sunny spent a lot of time searching for a suitable ranged specialist. In the end, his attention was drawn to the dossier of a woman named Samara. Awakened Samara was tall, beautiful, and aloof. She possessed a very interesting aspect, though Samara was capable of infusing material objects with soul essence, as well as converting soul energy into kinetic energy or heat. What it meant was that she could turn soul essence into charged explosives. In a sense, awakened Samara was the opposite of Master Jet. While Soul Reaper was able to deal soul damage with physical weapons, she could deal physical damage with soul essence. She was also very inventive in the applications of her aspect. Samara was probably the only awakened Sunny knew of who actively utilized modern firearms. By infusing her ammunition with charged essence, she effectively made them analogous to enchanted weapons. Nightmare creatures of higher ranks were more or less immune to mundane armaments, but susceptible to memories and even unarmed attacks of awakened. In Samara's hands, however, any weapon turned into an awakened weapon. What a fascinating ability. As an added bonus, she was also a capable spell tech engineer and technician. Since the APC the cohort would be using was chock full of advanced spell tech that was going to come in handy. The last member of the cohort Sunny had chosen was called Awakened Luster. Staring at the man's dossier, Sunny couldn't help but narrow his eyes. What a weird name. He shook his head and then sighed. Well, maybe his mother had a poetic soul too. The young man was not a very distinguished fighter. That was comparatively, of course, since all the elite government soldiers were solid combatants. His talent and usefulness lay mainly in his unique aspect. Although Sunny had not wanted to recruit more utility specialists, he couldn't help but change his stance after reading what young Luster was capable of. This guy was nothing short of a soul healer or an essence battery, in more crude terms. His first ability allowed him to enhance the regeneration rate of soul essence, both his own and that of his allies. His second ability allowed him to transfer his essence to others. Sunny did not even have to think to know how vital such an aspect was going to be in the coming months. Sure, by choosing Luster, he would be sacrificing the opportunity to recruit another battle powerhouse, but the trade-off was worth it, in his opinion. In other circumstances, Sunny would have been reluctant to make this decision, but Luster's abilities synergized simply too well with that of awakened Samara, not to mention serving as a force multiplier for every other member of the cohort. Additionally, the young man was, apparently, an ace pilot. With him in control of the Rhino, Sunny did not have to worry that the APC would fall off a cliff or get stuck in mud, or be turned into an alloy pancake by a random titan that happened to walk by. So, the choice was clear. Awakened Luster would be the last member of his cohort. Sunny moved slightly and looked at the 6 dossiers one last time. Kim, Belle, Dorn, Quentin, Samara, Luster. These 6 people were going to be his soldiers. He lingered for a moment, then let out a small sigh and marked the dossiers with his personal identification code. Soon, the bureaucracy of the 1st Evacuation Army would approve the recruitment request. And then, he would finally meet his new subordinates face to face. Chapter 823-6 Awakened. Awakened Luster was in a strange mood. On one hand, his life and career were going better than ever. Not only had he managed to become a member of the Special Forces, he also received a chance to participate in the most exciting operation of the last several decades. His status, citizenship rank, and even salary were now higher than he had ever hoped. It was hard to imagine that a guy like him managed to climb so far without being a legacy or even possessing a combat aspect. It was certainly better than working in a boring spell tech research facility, which he had been considering before joining the government army. Plus, he was surrounded by tons of pretty girls every day. There were thousands of them in the port fortress, and even more in the greater encampment beyond. With his dashing uniform reputation of a valiant elite and irresistible personality, many of them paid Luster special attention. Overall, things were great. On the other hand, the world seemed to be falling apart. The exciting operation he was so enthused about could very well become his last. What a bummer. Sitting on a broken panel of a discarded prefab building, Luster watched the swarm activity in the camp below and sipped his coffee. That was another thing once they shipped to the southern quadrant. Luxuries like coffee would probably become scarce. He would have to go back to synthetic substitutes, or even worse, drink something as disgusting as tea. The horror. Luster grimaced, then glanced at the plain-looking young woman sitting next to him. What do you think, Kimmy? Are we going to receive our assignments today? Awakened Kim hesitated for a bit, then said in an awkward tone, I don't know. Luster shook his head. Kimmy was the strangest person he had ever met. This timid girl was the only awakened he knew, who somehow managed to not look hot. As far as he was concerned, that was a bizarre accomplishment. Every awakened was hot. That was just common knowledge. Everyone except for Kimmy. She single-handedly destroyed Luster's whole worldview. He just did not know what to make of that fact. Belle, who was perching on the same prefab panel, looked at them and flashed a smile. I think we will. Luster felt a rush of excitement. Oh, do you know something? The blonde daredevil leaned forward, then said in a hushed tone, I heard from my pal in logistics that Soul Reaper finalized the command structure of her unit yesterday. That means they'll start recruiting today. After that is done, the other elite units will be free to pick out the rest of us. Hell yeah. Luster grinned, remained silent for a bit, and then sighed wistfully. I know that the chances are slim, but wouldn't it be great to be picked by Soul Reaper's unit? Just imagine, ascended jet, she's such a bah. Before he had the chance to finish his sentence, their communicators suddenly received a notification. The strange part of it was that all 3 lit up simultaneously. Kimmy was the first to read the message. Her eyes widened. Seeing her reaction, Luster felt his heart sinking. Kimmy? What is it? She lingered for a moment, and then showed him the screen. First Irregular Company. We've been assigned to Soul Reaper's unit. It's actually her. Luster, Kimmy, and Belle left their observation spot and headed toward the training facility, where they had been ordered to gather by the end of the hour. They were a strange trio. Sure, each was considered an elite, but in usual circumstances, a combat specialist like Belle would not have been keeping company with 2 younger support operators, unless they were members of his cohort, of course, which neither Luster nor Kimmy were. The Antarctica campaign, however, had changed a lot of things. While troop movements in the waking world were happening on a massive scale, something similar, but less noticeable, was currently happening in the Dream Realm. The awakened assigned to the 1st Evacuation Army were hastily relocating to larger and better protected citadels, so that a sudden attack of nightmare creatures could not disrupt their deployment in Antarctica. Some were going to government citadels, while some were going to impregnable legacy strongholds like Bastion or Ravenheart. All across the Dream Realm, thousands of awakened were participating in this quiet exodus. Luster, Kimmy, and Belle had just happened to reside in the same general area of the Dream Realm. The awakened serving the government banded together to brave the wilderness and reach Bastion, forming a large caravan that only grew bigger as it passed various citadels. Eventually, a couple hundred awakened all traveled together while their physical bodies were being relocated to various ports, locked inside the sleeping pods. It was a weird thing. Luster had fallen asleep in one place, but woke up thousands of kilometers south of it. In any case, in the month that it had taken him to reach Bastion on foot, he and the two other elite specialists traveling with the caravan had become somewhat close. They were not really friends, but at least knew each other. That could not be said about the other three awakened they met after reaching the reinforced prefab building. Luster's face grew a little dim when he realized that two of them were dudes. The third one, however, wow, the tall, gorgeous redhead was a real bombshell. Sure, she seemed unapproachable and older than him by a good decade, but that only added to her charm. Bell lightly tapped the young man on the shoulder. "Get your head out of the gutter, fool." Luster blinked a couple of times, then looked at the swordsman with a sheepish smile. "Oh, sorry." Kimmy glanced at the two of them with confusion and said quietly, I think I know her. That is awakened Samara. When I trained to receive the technician certificate, she taught the spell tech introduction class to us." She squirmed a little, then approached the tall woman and forced out a small smile. "Instructor Samara. It is so nice to see you again." The aloof beauty glanced at the meek young woman and nodded. "You can call me Sam. We are colleagues now." Kimmy froze for a moment. "Yes, I will, Instructor Samara. I mean, Instructor Sam." She blushed a little and then gestured at her two companions. "These are awakened Bell and awakened Luster. We traveled to Bastion together." Samara looked at the two men, then said in an emotionless tone, "These are awakened Quentin and awakened Dorn. We just met." The six elites studied each other for some time. Eventually, Bell scratched the back of his head and asked, does anyone know who our commanding officer is?" Chapter 824, Mysterious Master. Nobody was sure who exactly the ascended in charge of their new cohort was. Nevertheless, after briefly getting acquainted, the six awakened couldn't help but wonder. Quentin, the handsome warrior with a gallant demeanor, seemed thoughtful. "Master Sunless, I don't think I have ever heard of him. There is no ascendant of that name among those who had been with the government for a long time that I am sure of." He lingered for a moment, and then added with slight reluctance, "I did hear a few rumors, though." Luster looked at him with a lively smile. "Come on then, don't leave us hanging." Quentin sighed, clearly uncomfortable to be participating in something that could be amounted to gossip. Eventually, however, his curiosity won over decorum. "Well, it's not much. I just heard that Master Jet deliberately postponed the formation for the first irregular company to give this gentleman enough time to arrive, and that she personally recruited him." Luster blinked a couple of times. If Soul Reaper had gone out of her way to make sure that the guy joined her unit, then he had to be a beast. Bell confirmed his suspicion. "I actually heard that Ascended Sunless is a real monster. A demon of a fighter with a wild, bloodthirsty streak. Apparently he killed 400 awakened abominations as a sleeper. Some even say that he hunted down an ancient fallen devil before awakening." A strange silence settled in the training gymnasium. Luster scoffed. "Yeah, right. That's impossible." Samara, who had remained mostly silent before that, suddenly spoke. "My information is different from what I've been told. He is a distinguished explorer and academic researcher. His published works are supposed to be available in the government database. They are very extensive exploration reports about dangerous regions of the dream realm and the nightmare creatures populating them." That sounded more believable. Explorers of the dream realm might not have been the most renowned fighters, but they had to be capable to survive its wild expanse. It would make sense if Soul Reaper wanted to recruit a knowledgeable academic, since the other captains of the first irregular company already covered the combat prowess in spades. Vandal, Mustang, Queen, Knight, and Pride were legends among the government soldiers. Their renown only paled in comparison to the dreaded Soul Reaper herself. Kimmy suddenly moved and said in a faltering voice, I heard that he is utterly mad. Some say that he actually comes from the Forgotten Shore, where he lived completely alone in the Dark City for a long time. They even say that Changing Star of the Immortal Flame clan once said that he was the only person she was afraid to fight. I mean, it's ridiculous, of course. Her voice gradually grew quieter and then trailed off. After a short and somewhat awkward pause, the giant man, Dorn, spoke in a steady tone. Those are all just rumors. I only know that Ascended Sunless is relatively young, however. We don't need to guess. There is a lot that we can assume just from who he chose as the members of his cohort. Luster craned his neck and looked at the intimidating strongman. Yeah? Like what? Dorn shrugged. Well, for one, our composition is quite telling. We have 2 offensive fighters, a healer, a ranged specialist, and 2 support specialists. The cohort seems to be well-rounded, but it lacks means to fulfill several key roles. We don't have a reliable scout, and our defense is comparatively subpar. He paused for a moment and then added, that suggests that Ascended Sunless is a utility specialist with a scouting ability. Alternatively, he might be a defense-oriented fighter, or simply a believer in an offense-centered military doctrine. He might also possess a powerful echo that can serve as a defensive bulwark. Dorn thought for a bit. What is especially interesting to me is that he deliberately chose Awakened with higher than usual mental resilience. He also neglected direct combat efficiency in favor of aspects that possess sufficient longevity. The presence of Awakened Luster only confirms the fact that our commanding officer puts a lot of value in sustainability. All of that tells me that he has a very mature outlook on combat that is in direct contradiction to his young age. Luster followed along, surprised that he had not come to these conclusions himself. The big guy is wicked smart. He cleared his throat, then said, well, he is a master. Everyone says that the second nightmare is the game changer. Who knows what kind of crap he experienced there? Stuff like that can make a person mature real fast. Well said. Luster nodded, pleased to receive a bit of praise, but then almost jumped. Wait, who said that? At some point, a 7th person had somehow appeared in the gymnasium without being noticed by any of them. He was of small stature, with flawless ivory skin, black hair, and unfathomable dark eyes. The guy was extremely young and looked like a porcelain doll. In fact, he was kind of cute in a strange, unsettling sort of way. Luster frowned. Who's that shorty? Then, realizing who was in front of him, he froze. The new arrival smiled. Good morning, Awakened. I am Master Sunless. You can call me Captain Sunless, or simply Captain. From today forward, I will be your commanding officer. He remained silent for a few moments. Then, his pleasant smile slowly turned strangely ominous. Captain Sunless stared directly at the 6 of them and added, yes, I killed 400 awakened abominations and hunted down a fallen devil as a sleeper. Yes, I am a distinguished explorer and researcher whose published works are well known in academic circles. And yes, I indeed come from the Forgotten Shore, where I lived in the Dark City completely alone and went slightly mad. The frightening smile grew a little wider. But all of that is in the past. I am utterly sane now. I am not deranged at all. You truly have nothing to worry about. Chapter 825. Under Pressure. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Sunny had so much to do that there was no time to concentrate on any one thing for too long. The first evacuation army camp around him was in a similar state, becoming increasingly more hectic and busy as the date of the naval convoy's departure approached. Luckily, he was more than familiar with having to act fast while enduring immense pressure. The first thing Sunny did after introducing himself to the members of his cohort was briefly reiterate the key objectives of the upcoming campaign, as well as share several pieces of information about the hardships they would most likely have to endure and the intended role of the first irregular company that his soldiers had not been privy to before. After Sunny finished his briefing, the mood in the empty gymnasium turned somewhat grim. Not wishing to let the 6 awakened stew in their apprehension, he immediately transitioned to the next stage of getting to know his subordinates. Summoning the cruel sight, Sunny smiled pleasantly and asked them to attack him, one at a time. He wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by dueling each of the cohort members right off the bat. First of all, Sunny knew that he had to win their respect. No matter what Master Jet had said, these experienced soldiers were not going to put their trust in him easily. He was young, small, and a complete stranger. Although forging a real bond would take more time and effort, a simple demonstration of strength was a good start. Secondly, he needed to understand their powers and techniques better. A simple duel was the best way to do that. Sunny had an additional advantage in that regard, since his mastery of shadow dance allowed him to learn much faster and peer much deeper than almost anyone else. In the next 30 minutes or so, he ruthlessly demolished each of his subordinates without even breaking a sweat. Although all of them were very good at what they did, his power and skill were simply too domineering. The only ones who gave Sunny a bit of a problem were Dorn and Samara. The former's aspect was very insidious when used with sufficient foresight. While Sunny was strong enough to shake off the force of the big man's aspect, even he had to improvise when subjected to it at exactly the worst and most inconvenient moment. Samara presented a different challenge, although her preferred method of combat centered around infusing bullets with charged soul essence. She was perfectly capable of simply forming her essence into projectiles without a tangible medium, even if these soul darts weren't as fast or far-reaching. Fighting her meant being subjected to a constant barrage of explosive energy. It was a good thing that the gymnasium was built with Awakened in mind. Otherwise, the whole structure might have collapsed. In any case, neither of them managed to really slow Sunny down. Of course, he took care to exert just enough strength to defeat the members of the cohort in a decisive fashion, but not wound them. After the 6 duels were finished, he had a much better understanding of what his subordinates were capable of. Not only had Sunny been able to grasp the core tenets of their battle techniques, he was also very satisfied with adding 6 nuanced, polished styles to his mental library. Knowing what to expect from the 6, Awakened not only allowed him to form a tentative vision of how the cohort would perform in battle and how to command it to achieve the best result, but also helped him come up with an optimized training plan that would turn them into a semblance of a cohesive fighting force in a short amount of time. Sadly, 4 weeks was not nearly enough time to turn 7 relative strangers into a truly coordinated battle unit. The insight he had received due to shadow dance helped substantially accelerate the process, but the progress was still insufficient. Hopefully they would reach at least the minimal threshold of mutual understanding by the time the naval convoy reached Antarctica. After coming up with the plan, Sunny did not linger before putting it in motion. To his amusement, the training facility assigned to the cohort happened to include 7 dreamscape pods. These were different from the one he had back home, however. Instead of being connected to the public selection of arenas, it was integrated into a closed network operated by the government. It was also centered around battles with simulated nightmare creatures, as opposed to personal duels. Sunny was even able to tune the battle scenarios to fit his goals and personal preferences to a certain extent. At first, he was very enthusiastic about this novel method of training, but then grew slightly disappointed with it. Dreamscape was simply incapable of simulating the true madness and dread of the nightmare creatures. The illusory monsters they fought were strong and threatening, but lacked the spark of life and the perverse intelligence that made the real deal so deadly. Illusions were simply incapable of pressuring the cohort enough, so Sunny found something else to really pressure his people: himself. After the first few days, he allocated significant time to battles where all 6 had to contain a single target: their captain. While Sunny looked much less frightening than a nightmare creature, his subordinates quickly learned that he was infinitely more terrible. After an especially intense clash, the 6 Awakened crawled out of the dreamscape pods and wandered off to grab a bite and rest for a bit. Soon, several of them gathered in the staff kitchen attached to the gymnasium. Luster was rubbing the shoulder he had bruised in one of the real-world training sessions as he groaned. "Devil, he is a devil." Sunny, who sat comfortably in his luxurious memory chair on the other side of the building, studying a topographical map of Antarctica, looked up from the screen of his communicator and grinned. That guy is closer to the truth than he thinks. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Samara glanced at Luster with disapproval and shook her head. Unexpectedly, Kim decided to support the young man. "Actually, our captain, he might really not be a human, I think." The aloof beauty looked at her with confusion. Exposed to so much attention, Kim shifted uncomfortably. That, all humans share common weaknesses: temple, inner thigh where the artery is close to the skin, and so on. But Captain Sunless, does not. It's like his skull is indestructible, and he doesn't bleed. Luster's eyes widened. "See, I am telling you guys, he is a nightmare creature in disguise. We will all die before even reaching Antarctica." Samara stared at him for a few moments, and then said nonchalantly, "You know that he's probably listening, right?" Luster flinched and almost fell off his chair. On the other side of the building, Sonny put a hand over his mouth to stifle a wicked laugh.